We now move on to the backbench motion on Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman report on women's state pension age. Patricia Gibson to move.
Have secured this debate today on this very important issue, urging the UK Government to deliver prompt compensation to women born in the 1950s who had their state pension age raised following the report from the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman for the Department of Work and Pensions and their communication of changes to the state pension age for women. And I wish to begin by extending my thanks to the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate. And I want to begin also by lamenting the fact that it won't be possible to push this motion to a vote today, as tellers from both sides of the argument are required for such a vote to be held. And although I am disappointed that there will be no vote on this matter today, there is nothing at all to prevent the Government from bringing such a vote forward in government time. Indeed, the Parliamentary Health and Health Services Ombudsman has invited the House to express a view through laying its report before Parliament. So clearly this is something that really needs to happen. I will indeed.
Address the prejudice that was touched on at the Select Committee, DWP Select Committee last week, namely that there has been an element of contributory negligence in that this was not a state secret, it was advertised, it was covered in the newspapers, and that some women who were approaching retirement or early retirement did not take proper notice. Can she knock that on the head?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that if he reads the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman report, they make it very clear that the action taken to inform women in the appropriate way that one would expect was not taken, and indeed the DWP was negligent in that regard.
Well said.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and she started off powerfully, as I knew she would, knowing what a huge advocate she is for WASPy women. I think that the honourable gentleman's contribution was very helpful there. It is, does she agree with me, ludicrous for anyone at any point to suggest that people, in this case these women, should have found out about a change to their pension arrangements by happening to read advertisements in the correct newspaper on the correct day. None of us should be planning our lives that way, surely.
Indeed, you make my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and we know, do we not, that many women impacted found out at the very last possible moment that their retirement age had been raised because they had not been given due notice to make plans in the way that we would all expect, and the DWP has been found to be negligent. And I'll say more about that in just a moment, Mr Deputy Speaker. The issue before us today goes to the heart of our sense of justice and fairness and the social contract the government of the day has with its citizens. A whole generation of women had their pension age raised without the notice that they are entitled to expect, robbing them not just of tens of thousands of pounds in pension payments, but robbing them of their retirement plans, robbing them of financial peace of mind, robbing them of the contract they believed that they had. They believed that they had with the society in which they worked hard, paid their dues, fulfilled their responsibilities, and in which they thought they could enjoy some sort of retirement in later life. After all, they had earned it, had they not. And this social contract is an agreement we all think we should be able to rely upon. But when you tear at the edges of that contract, when you rip it through as though it never existed at all, then what retirement can any of us, should any of us, count on? I have met with a whole range of women campaigning against this state pension inequality, the WASPy women, over a number of years. And of particular note is the Ayrshire WASPy group and the Cunningham Waspie Group, who represent Waspie women in my constituency of North Ayrshire and Arran, and indeed Waspie women right across Ayrshire. But all the women in the Waspie movement have distinguished themselves by their very effective campaigning against this gross injustice which has been perpetrated upon them. And they have done so in the face of extreme provocation from a government which has been tone deaf to their pleas for justice. I have been inspired by their dignity, their resilience in the face of great financial hardship, their persistence, and indeed the compelling justice of their case. And I know many of the women involved, I know their stories, and I note the hugely helpful insight provided by writer D. Wilde Kearney, author of Not Going Away, who joins us in the public gallery. And Not Going Away is available from all good bookshops. And it outlines the struggles of some of the women involved in this campaign. And I pay tribute to Dee for her work in disseminating this injustice to an even wider audience. And I welcome also all the Waspie women who are now in the public gallery, some of whom have travelled considerable distance to be here today. And they are entitled to have their voices heard and their case answered. When a whole generation of women find themselves victims of injustice on such a grand and heartbreaking scale, those MPs who champion their cause feel the weight of their frustrations, the weight of their hardships, and their profound sense of having been screwed over. And in turn, as MPs, we feel our own frustrations when faced with an intransigent government which refuses to listen and appears wilfully blind to the facts. I will indeed.
I'm very grateful to my friend for giving me on that point of supporting constituents. One of my constituents who we've worked with since 2015 was one of the 6 Ombudsman test cases. And actually, the reason I'm not making a speech in today's debate is because I'm meeting the Ombudsman on behalf of my constituent at 2 p.m. But is she not as frustrated? She is frustrated with the government's lack of action so far, but is she not as disappointed and angry as I am at the Labour Party and their refusal to back the Waspie women, despite promising tens of billions in compensation at the last election?
Just before the Honourable Lady proceeds, there are some 21 Members of Parliament who wish to participate in this debate. It's an important subject, I understand that. I have no desire whatsoever to curtail either the debate or the right of honourable members to intervene. And I also appreciate only too well the urgency of getting your own point on the record. But if the front bench, or indeed any other member, gives way to too many people, not all honourable members will be called. And I think it's important that every honourable member who has their name in seeks to speak. So I hope we can resist, whenever not necessary, the temptation to intervene. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I take on board your comments about interventions. But none of the intransigence of the UK government that we've talked about, none of this has distracted from the dignity with which those campaigners have conducted themselves over the long years this swindle has been carried out, and it is indeed a swindle. And I will go back. My honourable gentleman raised a very good point about our disappointment and, some would say, disgust at the Labour Party's current position. But I will return to that, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I will, in due course, to respond to my honourable friend's concerns. After years of marching, lobbying, letter writing, email writing, attending surgeries, after years of tireless campaigning, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has finally reported. And that report vindicates the Waspie women. And it highlights the DWP's failure to communicate, which, and I quote, negatively affected complainants' sense of personal autonomy and control over their finances. And that the DWP did not, I quote, and I quote, adequately investigate and respond to complaints, and in a damning condemnation highlighted that the DWP, despite all of this, and I quote again, will not take steps to put things right, and that its refusal to do so was, and I quote again, unacceptable. It concluded that, and if you'll indulge me, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll quote again, Parliament needs now to act swiftly and make sure a compensation scheme is established. We think this will provide women with the quickest remedy. This is surely one of the gravest injustices of our time, alongside the contaminated blood scandal and the Horizon scandal. Another example of citizens having things done to them, which in every measure is wrong and unjust. I will indeed.
I commend my honourable friend for securing today's debate, and on behalf of the Midlothian WASPI women, say thank you to her for all the work she's done, and all the other members who have contributed to making sure this debate could happen. But does she not agree with me that the fact that these injustices happen over and over and over again just show how out of touch government has become in this place?
One would be forgiven, Mr Deputy Speaker, for thinking of a real disconnect between those who we seek to serve and those who serve. And when that disconnect repeatedly happens, and this systematic failure perpetrates such injustice, then it is a very, very bad day for democracy. But the difference in this case between the contaminated blood scandal and the Horizon scandal, both of which were awful injustices, the difference is that in those particular scandals, the government at least appears to wish to take action, albeit very slowly. It appears to wish to make moves to address these injustices. But in this case of changing the state pension age with little or no notice, with the devastating consequences that has brought about, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has been moved to say, and I quote again, it is extremely rare that an organisation that PHSO investigates does not accept and act on recommendations made. But the PHSO has no legal powers to enforce compliance. A failure to comply with the Ombudsman recommendations represents a constitutional gap in protecting citizens' rights who have been failed by a public body and ensuring access to justice. By laying this report, the PHSO has asked the Parliament to intervene to agree a mechanism for remedy and hold government to account for delivering this. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, here we are. We are holding the government to account, whilst the government and the incoming Labour government enjoy a cosy, do-nothing consensus, sacrificing WASPI women on the bonfire of austerity they have built together in a deliberate and conscious way. Yet, for the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman to issue such a statement is unprecedented. But it illustrates just how shocking it is that this government, supported by the loyal opposition, loyal in ways we could only imagine, appears to be trying to ignore, obfuscate and gaslight its way out of this crisis. And it is a crisis if you are one of the women who has been impacted. Now we are in a situation where neither Labour nor the Tories in government have yet even accepted the principle of financial redress for WASPI women. Not even the principle. How do I know this? Because when the Secretary of State made a statement shortly after the long-awaited publication of this report, he made no mention of redress or compensation, but went on instead to list how great it currently is to be a pensioner in the United Kingdom because of the sheer munificence of the UK government. And the Labour Shadow Secretary of State's response to that statement studiously avoided mentioning compensation as well, instead delivering a patronising yet supine eulogy on treating pensioners with dignity. Empty words don't pay bills, and no one is fooled by that nonsense. But we perhaps should not be too surprised, since Labour has a track record of letting women down, particularly working-class women. After all, It's the Labour administration and Glasgow City Council spent £2.5 million of taxpayers' money fighting equal pay claims by female council workers over 10 years. This shows beyond any reasonable doubt just how far Labour was prepared to go to fight equal pay, an incredible waste of public money. But it took an SNP administration in the council in Glasgow to ensure the legal action was stopped, the pay claims settled, and these were treated as a priority by the incoming SNP administration. So we know that Labour has a track record of denying justice to women, so we can't expect much from that quarter, and anybody who does will be disappointed. However, the WASPy women I have spoken to feel particularly betrayed by Labour MPs and MSPs who have spent the last umpteen years posing for photographs, smiling broadly alongside WASPy campaigners, pledging what turned out to be empty words of support, only to abandon them at the very moment they are vindicated by the Ombudsman. Now, the very debate we are having today, Mr Deputy Speaker, was had in the Scottish Parliament last week. Labour MSPs, who are not just members of the Scottish Parliament, of course, but members of the Scottish branch office, they abstained as ordered by their high command bosses in London. And they abstained on a motion. Incredibly, they abstained on a motion which called for a higher level of compensation to properly reflect the financial harm that has been suffered by WASPy women. Now, that motion sounds pretty reasonable to me. It sounds pretty reasonable to anybody. The sums mentioned in the Ombudsman report are simply too low. I think most people would agree that. And it must be considered in the context that the UK government has saved £181.4 billion purely by raising the state pension age of these women. So it's time to get real. And perhaps the UK government could examine the private members' bill brought forward by my colleague for Kilmarnock and Loudon, and perhaps go from there. But instead, all we have is silence from both the UK government and the Labour opposition. But, you know, the leader of the opposition in this House himself has benefited from a special law passed in Parliament. And that law, Mr Deputy Speaker, is called the Pensions Increase, open brackets, Pension Scheme for Keir Starmer QC, close brackets, Regulations 2013. And that relates to when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions in England, where his personal pension is protected. It is quite literally one law for him and another law for everybody else, especially if you're a WASPy woman, and more so if you're a working class woman. And it doesn't escape anyone's notice that the Leader of the Opposition is now very silent on the injustice suffered by WASPy women and supports less generous pensions for everyone else. What a brass neck! What shameful hypocrisy! Maybe he's just so cocksure of a thumping Labour majority at the next election that he thinks WASPy women are expendable. Who knows? Meanwhile, around 280,000 WASPy women who have been impacted have died since the start of the WASPy campaign. Around 6,000 have died since the publication of the Ombudsman report. Why is there no urgency to address this issue, this injustice? No wonder WASPy women's impatience and sense of injustice is fast turning into outright fury. Who could blame them? And because of the evasions and misdirections used in previous debates, I wish to say to the Minister, this is not a debate about returning the retirement age back to 60. This is not a debate about the triple lock. It's not a debate about anything except the injustice suffered by women born in the 1950s who have been vindicated by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. Well, indeed.
Lady, for making way, and I think all of us in this room have spoken to our WASPy women. I have Barbara and Lynn from Hartlepool in here today, and they informed me earlier that actually every 13 minutes a 1950s woman dies. So that 280,000 is growing as we speak.
The Honourable Lady for the point that she made, and all she does is emphasise how desperately urgent this matter is. And every 13 minutes, a WASPI woman dies, so how many will die while we're having this debate? Another half dozen, who knows? Yeah. More than that. There are no more hiding places. It is time for swift compensation to be delivered to these women who have already endured far too much hardship and distress. And the redress that they are accorded must reflect that suffering, and there must be no barriers to accessing it for any of the women affected. No one can any longer deny the rightness of their compelling case. It's time to pay up, it's time to deliver. As the Minister and the Labour leadership must surely know by now, these women are not going away. So it is my hope that when the Minister gets to his feet, he will have something meaningful to say to this House today, and all the WASPI women who have already waited too long for justice. Perhaps he can at least set out some kind of time frame when the Government will bring forward redress proposals for those impacted. It is a travesty to drag this injustice out for a moment longer. And I hope the Minister agrees and does the right thing by this generation of women. Or will these women continue to suffer whilst his government pontificates? I hope not. But I will say today to the Minister, and I'll say today to the WASPI women who are here listening both at home and in the public gallery, that the SNP unequivocally stands with you. We will not abandon you as others have done.
Question is as on the order paper. Andrew Selous.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger, and it's a privilege to speak in this debate today. When my constituents come to see me and they have made a complaint, we quite often get to the stage where I recommend the Ombudsman to them. And I regularly say to them, have faith. Ombudsmen quite often find in favour of the complainant. Ombudsmen are there for a purpose, and we cannot merely support the institution of an ombudsman when it makes a convenient finding for the government of the day. We have to accept its decisions if we are going to have an ombudsman in place. We all know that trust in politics, trust in politicians, trust in us as MPs is at something of a low point at the moment, no matter what party we are in. Now, I think that's actually very unfair, because I think most people in this House, of all parties, are decent people, doing the best for their constituents and working very hard. So that reduction in trust really worries me. And I think the response of the government and the response of Parliament to this Ombudsman's report is really important, because it touches on this issue of trust in our institutions, which have been through a very difficult time. I will indeed.
I warmly welcome the thrust of my honourable friend's argument, and for the benefit of the record, can I draw his and the House's attention in particular to paragraph 459 of the report, which says in part, for most sample complainants, we consider the primary injustice is that they were denied opportunity to make informed decisions about some things and to do some things differently because of maladministration in DWP's communication about state pension age. That's a material injustice.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and what he said is accurate. He quotes from the report. It was in July 2021 that the Ombudsman found maladministration, and in the report on the 21st of March, they said that had led to an injustice. And like him, I will quote briefly from the report. And the Ombudsman says, talking of the DWP, in 2005 it failed to take adequate account of the need for targeted and individually tailored information. In 2006, DWP proposed writing directly to women individually to let them know their state pension age had changed, but it then failed to act promptly. we found that if DWP had made a reasonable decision about next steps in 2005 and then acted promptly, it would have begun writing to the affected women by December 2006. And indeed, my right honourable friend and other members will have seen in the back of the report there is a table as to what should have happened when. And I too have constituents who have written to me to say that they were really very close to the age of 60. Some had worked all their working lives since the age of 15 or so. They had made all their plans on the basis that they would be able to get their pension at 60, and they literally found out from colleagues in the workplace, sometimes very, very shortly before they thought they were due to retire. I will briefly, probably the last intervention I will make, just taking the heed of Mr Deputy Speaker, of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The point that the honourable gentleman makes is one that rings true with me, because I had the very first constituent who came to me with a problem when I was elected 7 years ago was a WASPy woman. And she had been less than 2 years from retirement when she learned by accident of this change. So 7 years on, she's no better off. She's much worse off in a lot of ways. And actually, a lot of women who are not WASPy women are now wondering if actually they know the truth about when they'll get their pension. So does he agree with me that although it's fundamentally about the WASPy women, it is about trust and women having trust in this institution?
I agree with the honourable lady, and I think this issue of trust is really, really important, and one that this House should not take lightly. Now, in my South West Bedfordshire constituency, it's estimated there are 6,000 women in this situation. The cost of the compensation recommended by the Ombudsman at level 4 at the lower level would be £6 million, at the upper level would be £17.7 million. If we extrapolate that nationally across the UK, I think that's £3.9 billion at the lower end and £11.5 billion at the upper end. And we have, again, to be honest, and I do believe in honesty in politics, these are large sums. And they are also large sums when you add the amount we're going to have to pay for the postmasters and mistresses, for whom we are also all campaigning. When we are going to add up the sums for the victims of the infected blood scandal, for whom most of us are also campaigning, and Equitable Life and other campaigns that do not immediately. I will, as it's the honourable lady, but it really will be the last intervention, because I
just want to make a brief point. I thank the gentleman for giving way. He's talking about how the bill is mounting for all these compensation schemes. Does that not merely underline the importance of competent government?
Well, of course it's best if government gets these things right, but I would say that government is difficult, and governments of all parties are going to make mistakes because they are human. But I'm actually making a different point about honesty with the overall government finances, because when I was taught economics a long time ago, I was taught the notion of opportunity cost. In other words, you can only spend the same pound once, and if we are going to spend billions on this, then we have to be honest about what other things we cannot spend money on, things that those WASPy women themselves may very much want, or what other services we're going to have to cut, or what other taxes are we going to have to raise. So I have tried to find out from the Commons Library how the Treasury Reserve works, how we account nationally for a type of contingency fund to pay out on these issues. And I think we just need a bit of honesty here as a Parliament. If we are going to do the right thing by the WASPy women, as I believe we should, and as I want us to, and as I think we should for these other groups, I think we need to look at a dedicated fund in the Treasury reserves for contingencies. Now, that will be of a certain sum, and it may not be large enough, perhaps the nation won't be able to afford it, to spend money out on every cause in the way that we would like. So whilst I absolutely back the justice of the WASPy women, and I think we should honour what the Ombudsman has said, or at least start moving to do that, I do think we need to be honest about the nation's finances and the other calls on the Exchequer. But I finish where I began, and I'm being brief, heeding the Deputy Speaker's injunction. This does come back to trust. You don't just agree with the umpire when it takes a decision that you are in favour of. We have an Ombudsman or we don't, and if it makes a finding, it may be uncomfortable, it may be inconvenient. This is the finding. we should do the right thing.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I also want to thank the Backbench Business Committee on giving us the opportunity to have this debate, and thank the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran on opening it. A point that I should make clear at the start, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that I was the Minister for Pensions between December 1998 and July 1999, and again between May 2005 and May 2006, which is part of the period covered by the Ombudsman's report. I also want to draw the attention of the House to the evidence my committee, the Work and Pensions Select Committee, took on last week, on the 7th of May, on the Ombudsman's report. And we're grateful for all those who gave evidence to us on that morning, and also to the letter that I sent yesterday on behalf of the committee to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, setting out our suggestions for the way forward, and those documents have been tagged for this debate. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Ombudsman opened an investigation into all of this in 2018, 6 years ago. After receiving more than 600 cases, it stopped accepting new ones and selected 6 sample cases, 1 or 2 of which have already been referred to in this debate, and decided to investigate those 6. The investigation was split into 2 stages. The first report, published in July 2021, found maladministration in the way that DWP communicated the changes to affected women. And then there's the further report, the recent one, published in March, concluding that this had meant that, and I quote, some women had lost opportunities to make informed decisions about their finances, which had diminished their sense of personal autonomy and financial control, caused unnecessary stress and anxiety, and unnecessary confusion. I will give way, yeah.
Really grateful. I said at the outset that the honourable gentleman was a distinguished minister, well respected across the House during his various jobs in government. Isn't that the nub of it? So, of course, the decision itself is a matter of debate on pension entitlement, but there is an entirely separate matter about how that decision is communicated, and the injustice is in that failure to communicate. If you change people's circumstances at notice and they have time to deal with it, cope with it, make alternative arrangements is one thing. When you don't give them adequate notice because of their age, it's quite another. And if Disraeli said, I think justice is truth in action, that's the truth of the matter.
I think the honourable member is echoing a number of the points the Ombudsman has drawn to our attention. I do think, Mr Deputy Speaker, we should be clear that a lot of people did know about this change. Passing of the legislation was widely reported at the time, nearly 30 years ago. I vividly recall in the first of those 2 stints as Pensions Minister, I spent a fair chunk of most days signing replies to letters from MPs who'd written on behalf of their constituents, unhappy at this impending change or calling on the then fairly new government to change it. And the replies I signed were robust and clear that the decision wasn't going to be reversed. So the decision was quite well known, and I do think the Right Honourable Member for New Forest West made a useful point. I do think that citizens have a responsibility to keep themselves informed, listening to the radio, reading the papers about changes to the law that affect them. But what the Ombudsman has established and has made clear in the report is that the department found out at around, I have to say, the second time that I was Pensions Minister, apparently, that only 40% of women knew about the forthcoming pension age change. Now, 40% is a lot of people, but 60% is an even larger number who did not know. The department found that out from some research in 2003-04 and did nothing about it for several years until 2009. And that is the maladministration that the Ombudsman has identified. We don't know why nothing was done, or I certainly don't. The Ombudsman hasn't told us. But I don't think it can credibly be argued that this was not maladministration. To find that information out and do nothing I think there clearly is a problem. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful for him giving way and giving his own experiences of this matter. Isn't one of the issues that we've got a very clear finding of maladministration, but government acceptance of that does not automatically follow. So we're having a debate today about whether we accept the findings when actually, given the timescales, really we ought to be thinking more about how we implement some of the issues about who's eligible and who isn't.
Yeah, I agree with my honourable friend. I'm going to come on to that in the discussion the Select Committee had about that last week. Just worth adding, I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the problems caused by that maladministration were then exacerbated by the decision in 2011 to increase the state pension age not to 65, as had been legislated in 1995, but up to 66, and give very little notice at all of that change. Now, the Ombudsman said, had it reported directly to DWP, it would have recommended that DWP apologise for the maladministration and take steps to put things right. As we now all know, the Ombudsman did not report directly to the department because of concern that no remedy would be forthcoming. And the interim Ombudsman, Rebecca Hilsenrath, told the committee last week that her office had been given repeatedly to understand that the department did not accept our findings. And I wonder whether the Minister, in winding up this debate this afternoon, can tell us whether the department does now recognise that there was maladministration in this case. In laying its report before Parliament in March, the Ombudsman asked us in the House to identify an appropriate mechanism for providing a remedy. And it set out its own thinking that the department should firstly acknowledge the maladministration and apologise. Secondly, that should pay financial compensation to the 6 sample complainants at level 4 of its severity of injustice scale. And thirdly, identify a remedy for others who had suffered injustice because of the maladministration. And as we've heard, it estimated that this would involve a sum of between 3.5 and 10.5 billion pounds. I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, we do need to find a resolution to this, and to find it now quite quickly. It has dragged on for a very long time. Angela Madden, the chair of the WASPI committee, told the Select Committee last week about somebody dying every 13 minutes, and it's a powerful point to make. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful for the right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I just want to briefly ask him on a point of resolution. Clearly, given the maladministration and the points given by the Ombudsman, the conclusion here needs to happen through a political choice. And that political choice is either the government sitting there or a government which might replace it at some point this year. Surely there must be women in my constituency in West Dunbartonshire, and everyone's constituency, needs political agreement, not obfuscation, not abdicating responsibility, but now clear political choice.
Hear, hear.
Yes, and the government has said it will respond without undue delay, and that it's considering the report in detail. And I wonder whether the Minister can tell the House this afternoon whether the government will bring forward proposals for remedy, as the Select Committee believes that it should, before the summer recess. I think we should set a clear timetable now for this. We need a scheme that's easy to administer. The Ombudsman said that in principle, redress should reflect the impact on each individual, but it recognised as well that the need to avoid delay and the large numbers involved may, and I quote, may indicate the need for a more standardised approach. And Jane Cowley, the campaign manager of WASPI, told the committee that given the need for action within weeks rather than years, the scheme should be based on, she suggested, 3 principles: speed, simplicity and sensitivity. And I think the evidence that's been gathered does point to a rules-based approach to working out the compensation that should be paid. Yeah.
I thank the member for giving way, and I've read the evidence that he chaired that was taken in April of this year. If there was agreement by the government that they had to accept responsibility for this and to go forward with it, how quickly, in his view, could we start to see the highly justified compensation being paid to these women?
Well, I'm grateful to him. I would hope quite quickly, and I'll explain why now. that the payments involved would be adjusted within a range based on the Ombudsman's severity of injustice scale, the 4.4 on that scale as they've suggested, and it would depend in particular on two variables. Firstly, the extent of change in that individual state pension age, how much did the age increase for them, and secondly, the notice that that individual received of the change. So the less notice you had of the change, the bigger the change in your state pension age, the higher the payment you would receive. Now, an arrangement like that would not be perfect, but it would be quite quick and relatively inexpensive to administer as well, compared to a more bespoke system, because it would involve applying known data to a formula to work out the amount that was due. So I want to ask the Minister whether he accepts in principle that a rules-based system here would be the best way forward. Beyond that, it was suggested to us that there should be some flexibility for individuals to make the case after the standard payment has been calculated that they experience direct financial loss as a result of the maladministration, and that they should therefore be entitled to a higher level of compensation. Now, the flexibility, I think, would be needed, because although the Ombudsman did not see direct financial loss in the 6 sample complaints it looked at, it didn't exclude the possibility that there could be in other cases. And for example, Angela Madden, again, chair of the WASPI campaign, suggested as an example to us that somebody whose divorce settlement was less than it would have been because it was based on the expectation that she would receive her state pension at age 60 might well have a case that she would be entitled to a larger amount because of that particular development. I will.
I'm grateful to the Ombudsman for giving way, because this is a very important point that he makes here, and it surely is that if you look at the experience of other compensation schemes, and the one that comes to my mind is the Icelandic trawlerman's compensation scheme, the longer you leave these things, the longer the passage of time, the more difficult it gets actually to resolve them. Does that not just underline the need for speed here?
Well, I agree with him that we do need to get on and resolve this after this very long period. So the Ombudsman suggested a remedy based on level 4 of its severity of injustice scale, based on the finding that individuals had experienced indirect financial loss. We didn't, on the committee, seek to question that view, and I don't intend to do so this afternoon. But regardless of the level of remedy or the means by which remedy is delivered, it is going to need parliamentary time, financial resources, and the data and technical systems only available to the Department for Work and Pensions. Even if a backbench member brings forward a private member's bill, as the honourable member for Kilmarnock and Loudon has, that bill cannot become law without government support. It will need a money resolution that only the government can bring forward. So it's not realistic to say that Parliament can resolve this. It must have the government's very, very full-hearted involvement. And while there'll be different views on the findings of the report from the Ombudsman, as the interim Ombudsman told the committee last week, she is appointed by Parliament to carry out these investigations and is accountable to it through the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. And I just wanted to read what Carl Bannister from the Ombudsman staff told the committee last week. He said, "We want everyone to comply with our recommendations, but it is implicit in the scheme that because we don't have enforcement powers, it may be sometimes that an organisation thinks it doesn't want to. Then the partnership is that Parliament, as our supervisor, will do something about that." And this is the point I think the honourable member from South West Bedfordshire was making earlier on. To continue the quote, "I think what would damage the standing of the Ombudsman is if Parliament declined to do that." So I think it is important for all of us that we do see this through. We've asked the Ombudsman to undertake this role. The Ombudsman has done the job we've asked them to do. Now we need to play our part in ensuring this matter is resolved. So time isn't on our side. The government has been aware of this issue for... yes, I will give it.
The member is giving an incredibly well-informed speech on this matter, and having met myself with Angela Madden and various WASPI women in Dudley, it is very clearly a highly complicated and difficult issue to resolve, especially if it is necessary for the government to look at appropriate and proportionate remedies for having first then identified those women who have come to harm. Does he agree with me that whatever solution is come to, that the need to really accelerate at pace the work on this incredibly complicated issue is necessary, as those of us of a greater age know that while the clock doesn't stop for anybody, it does certainly seem to accelerate for those of us of a greater age?
Well, I agree with him. I think we do need to get a move on, and that's why I think the government should commit to bringing forward some proposals before the summer recess, so that we all know where we're heading. So that's the point I really want to end with, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I think the government has got all the information it needs. It is a difficult and costly matter, but I do hope the government will be able to bring forward proposals in time for the summer recess of the House.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a great honour to follow the Right Honourable Member for East Ham, who really does have encyclopaedic knowledge of this subject. I'm very grateful for listening to his speech. It's no surprise that I want to speak today in representing the oldest cohort of constituents in the entire country. In North Norfolk, we have somewhere in the region of over 5,000 WASPI women who are impacted, and not a week goes by without receiving correspondence from women who were affected so terribly badly. I will come to the report's findings in a moment, but first of all I just want to reflect on what the real impact is and what has happened to those women caught up with this scandal. Because the problem with this place is that very often we forget about the real people and the real suffering. We sometimes get very preoccupied with the political and the financial problems in front of us, and we question why they happened in the very first place. But frankly, that is somewhat secondary to me, because we mustn't actually forget about those people who have been really affected, all of those women, because all around the entire country we are representing constituencies where there are quite literally thousands and thousands of women in our areas who are absolutely impacted by this. I will give way to the
Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He makes an important point about finding a resolution. It's been over 1,000 days since Ombudsman found the government guilty of administration. We've heard the shocking figure that a WASPI woman dies every 13 minutes. That would mean that since the Ombudsman's finding, over 100,000 affected women have passed away. So I'm sure he'd agree with me that we need to work together and ensure that the government must get a move on and bring forward compensation payout proposals before the summer recess, because people are passing away and time is of the essence.
I thank the Honourable Member for that point. Yes, I totally agree. This is now about speed. I'll come to that point later on in my speech. But WASPI women have already suffered for years and years, and now we've had this report published. The very fact that we should learn from the other injustices that we see in this place, such as the post office scandal, is that speed is of the absolute essence, and we do need to come up with a remedy as quickly as possible. I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, because he's making a very, very powerful speech about the impact on individuals as well as the numbers. And would he agree with me that this is about fairness, taking into account the individual facts of each case? Because Lee Lady Maggie Brierley retired 4 years before she turned 60 to look after her parents with dementia. Not then getting her pension as she fully expected to at 60 meant that she had to sell her home, She had to take up a low-paid job to make ends meet, and of course she couldn't look after the parents who suffered as well. So does my honourable friend agree with me that this is not just about fast compensation, it is about fair compensation based on the individual circumstances of each case, not just necessarily for Maggie, but for the 5,220 WASPy women in my constituency of Southend West?
Well, I thank the intervention from the Honourable Lady from Southend. She's absolutely right. This is about individuals, and it is about every single individual that has been impacted has a different life story to tell. And it is very difficult for the government to come out with a redress scheme that covers every eventuality, because the point that the Honourable Lady is making is that individual circumstances affect everybody that has been impacted. And all right, some people have coped. Some ladies have coped. They might have had savings. They might have had earnings or private pensions, and in some cases they were lucky enough they had family that were able to help out. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are an awful lot of women out there who had none of that. Had absolutely none of that. There are huge numbers that have suffered through absolutely no fault of their own. And as is repeated many times, many have died in recent years too. And I don't think we can imagine just how difficult it must be for some of those women who have absolutely had so little to cope because of this time delay they've suffered. It wasn't their fault. And back in my home in North Norfolk, I hear some of the dreadful cases of individuals, very much as the Honourable Lady from Southend is alluding to. Women that gave up work to care for a sick or dying husband. They were totally reliant on that pension that they thought was going to come, but it didn't. And they were not able to perhaps go back to work or find employment. It's not easy. And it is in those cases where that injustice has had such a profound impact on people's lives, their livelihoods, their mental well-being, and, in many cases, embarrassment on their financial standings, which has been so damaging for so many women. And, as I made a point just a moment ago, as a new MP, not so new anymore, I guess, we see so many injustices. It's a privilege to try and fix those, whether it's the infected blood, whether it's the loan charge, whether it's Hillsborough, whether it's the post office, one that's particularly pertinent to me. We should be about, in this place, learning how we can try to sort some of these injustices out. So I know the Minister, both Ministers are absolutely excellent, decent, empathetic people who I've spoken to this about before, and they care deeply about this issue. I do know that. And actually, it's been mentioned already today, we should be honest about the debate today. We should be honest about it. The public purse does not have billions of pounds spare capacity at the moment, and people that are watching are intelligent in our country. People can see that the financial scarring of the pandemic weighs very heavily on us. So in this debate, we should actually be practical with our suggestions as well, and we had a very in-depth practical set of steps which came from the Honourable Member from East Ham. Because a lot of the briefings that are coming from the WASPy Women campaigns and their requests, I think, are entirely sensible. I think they have a real right to be heard. There's no debate anymore, as far as I'm concerned, about the Ombudsman's report. It clearly found there was maladministration between 2005 and 2007. And that delay, as we have heard time and time again, has led to the problem we're in. So look, I think we need to just get over that point. It's happened. There is a problem. There's no point denying it. I get the odd cursory comment from constituents that say, well, they should have known about it all. It was advertised enough. That is not fair. The Ombudsman report makes that very, very clear. They were failed, in many cases, by the state, these women. So that redress, let's come to that point now, that compensation mechanism and how we deal with it, because it has to be clear, it has to be fair. I think it's absolutely right. Speed, sensitivity and simplicity, as was said earlier on. And if you read the WASPI Women's Campaign brief, actually it's very sensible in what is in there, that the government should come forward with a two-pronged approach. One that delivers a higher level of compensation to those with the shortest amount of notice of the longest delay to receiving the state pension. And why is that fair? Well, because those will be the women who were impacted the very, very most. And if they were impacted the very most, then they are the ones that will have suffered. And they deserve that redress. But that isn't enough to then not think about everybody else. And it is a sensible way to look at some eligibility criteria that is put together that somehow enables all of the other cohort of people that were impacted to a claiming mechanism to be able to be compensated. I think it's right that we come forward with that as quickly as possible. One thing I've learned in this place, not to be too facetious, things don't happen very quickly. But this is something that should be happening quickly. We know when the public mood moves, and we saw that over the post office scandal, we can move quickly. So actually, the report is here. WASPI women have already suffered for an inordinate amount of time. I would urge the government to come up with that remedy and get on with it quickly.
Sir George Howarth.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I too should begin by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for enabling this debate to take place. I suppose I should congratulate the Honourable Lady for North Ayrshire and Arran for opening the debate, and I do. But I would caution her that using the speech to promote division in this House of Commons is not the way to advance this issue. And I would also say that if she's really serious about it, if she listened to all of the speeches that have taken place so far, there is a consensus in this House, and the efforts need to be put into finding a way to bring that consensus forward. I'll try and be brief, Mr Deputy Speaker. The case for righting this injustice is, in my view, convincing. Although the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's inquiry noted that, and I quote, timely and accurate information was available about changes to the number of qualifying years needed for a full state pension as a result of the 2014 Act, the report did find maladministration in DUP's communication about the 1985 Pensions Act, and in addition, the report found that there was maladministration in DWP's complaint handling, causing complainants unnecessary stress and anxiety, and meant an opportunity to lessen the distress was lost. For some complainants, it also caused unnecessary worry and confusion. So that's pretty clear about the extent of the maladministration. In the context of this debate today, the Ombudsman stated that, again I quote, given the scale of the impact of DUP's maladministration and urgent need for a remedy, we are taking the rare but necessary step of asking Parliament to intervene. I should, before I go any further, stress the use of the word urgent, which I'll return to later in my speech and which several have already commented on. Before I do, however, I want to say a few words about the women who've been affected by this wholly unfair and unacceptable matter. We do, I think, need to remind ourselves that women born in the 1950s did everything required of them to ensure that reliable arrangements were in place when they reached pensionable age. That, for me, is the crux of the matter, and I strongly believe we do, as members of this House, have a responsibility to accept the duty we have to remedy the situation. And I want to turn to the Ombudsman's emphasis on the word urgency. My fear is that we will not deal with it urgently, and let me be clear, I do not believe that allowing the clock to run down until the forthcoming general election is an acceptable option. The fear was confirmed yesterday when at Prime Minister's questions in a response to my honourable friend, the member for Salford and Eccles, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Following the Ombudsman multi-year investigation, it is imperative to take time to review the finding thoroughly." Well, the problem with that response is that facts are already very well known, and it certainly doesn't meet the Ombudsman's conclusion as to the urgency of the issue. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to make a suggestion which I would urge both front benches to adopt. I believe we could do the right thing in this Parliament if the government and opposition parties could hold talks, convened and chaired by Mr Speaker, with a view to putting a bill before this House as speedily as possible. And I'm mindful and supportive of my honourable friend, the member for East Ham's suggestion that we could do something seriously before the summer recessed. As has been mentioned by others, Mr Deputy Speaker, every generation experiences injustices. In my time in this House, they've also included thalidomide victims, Hillsborough, Primados, contaminated blood, and most recently the Horizon scandal. For me, they are all debts of honour which we have a duty to redeem. I suspect that a majority of members of this House would agree with me, so please let us have the opportunity to do so.
Order. Order. Before I call the next speaker, I'm going to impose after the next speaker a time limit. Order. A time limit of 10 minutes. That, as they say, is not a target, it's a maximum. But if honourable members adhere to that, then we should have time for the front benches and the ability to accommodate every honourable member seeking to speak. Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the honourable member for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate and the Backbench Business Committee for granting it. The purpose of the debate is to consider the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's report of 21st March and how best to implement its recommendations. In brief, the following issues arise from the report. Firstly, the PHSO found that in 2005, the Department of Work and Pensions failed to take adequate account of the need for targeted and individually tailored information to be shared with women affected by the changes to the state pension age. This amounted to maladministration and resulted in the 6 complainants whose cases were considered not being able to do things differently and to make informed mitigating decisions. The PHSO concluded that they should be compensated for this. Secondly, the PHSO took the highly unusual step of laying their report before Parliament due to their concerns that the DWP would fail to provide a remedy. Whilst the PHSO have put forward a suggestion as to what this compensation should be, they have asked Parliament to intervene, to agree a mechanism for remedy and to hold government to account. Thirdly and finally, the PHSO point out that it is extremely rare for an organisation that they investigate not to accept and act on their recommendations. They make the observation that a failure to comply with the Ombudsman's recommendations represents a constitutional gap in protecting citizens' rights who have been failed by a public body and ensuring access to justice. Mr Deputy Speaker, my interest in this injustice arises from the fact that for approximately 8 years, as regular as clockwork, constituents have been highlighting to me the enormous challenges and hardship they have faced and endured. For the past 4 years, I have had the privilege of co-chairing the APPG on state pension inequality for women, firstly with the Honourable Member for Denton and Reddish, and more recently with the Honourable Member for Salford and Eccles. I also take this opportunity to thank our predecessors, the Honourable Member for Swansea East and my honourable friend, the Member for East Worthing and Shoreham. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is important to thank the PHSO for the work that they have done and the duty which they have carried out. They have received criticism, both for the time that they have taken and the narrow remit of considering 6 cases, which some are concerned do not fully reflect the injustice that 1950s-born women as a whole have had to endure. However, it would have been very easy for the PHSO to have decided that this was not a case for them to investigate. Instead, they have not shied away from the task. It has taken a long time because it is complicated, and there was a need also to get it right. Mr Deputy Speaker, what the PHSO have done is to provide us with a snapshot. It is up to us, Parliament, Government and the DWP, to extrapolate and to put right a problem that may well extend much wider. To do this, the PHSO have provided some guidelines which we need to follow. Parliament should take immediate steps to find a resolution for those for whom time is not on their side. Each case should be considered on its merits. Finite resources are not an excuse for failing to provide a fair remedy. If Parliament chooses to do nothing, that will undermine the Ombudsman. The Department of Work and Pensions should respect what Parliament recommends. There must be a commitment from Government to take on board the PHSO's findings and to work collegiately with Parliament in finding and then implementing a fair and just remedy. Mr. New Deputy Speaker, there is a wider issue that does need to be considered, and in the first instance, there may well be a case for the Right Honourable Member for East Ham and his Select Committee. This is the breakdown in communication and implementation of policy in the DWP going back over 30 years. I accept that their remit is a large and challenging and complicated one, but the PHSO highlight repeated failures in the Department's communication of state pension reform.
I want to be on that very point.
I will give you...
I'm extremely grateful for going away, but we mustn't let cause become more important than effect. It is right, as he describes, that we look at why this happened and how it happened, but what really matters is what happened, because what the WASPy women need is action quickly. And if we were to spend a great deal of time looking at the genesis of this, I'm not sure that quick action would be delivered. And so I endorse what the member from East Ham said, to establish criteria that could be affected with reasonable speed.
I thank my honourable friend for that point, and he makes this point well. I am diverting slightly from the main cause and theme, which I sense he and I are on the same page. As I said, there are my concern about repeated failures in the department's communications. Mr Deputy Speaker, only last Saturday, a constituent was highlighting to me how the introduction of the new state pension penalises those women born in 1951 and 1952. And the End Frozen Pensions campaign, they point out that for 85% of frozen pensioners did not know of the policy's existence prior to moving abroad. Very quickly, it is a sideshow. But
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. The report actually does acknowledge that the DWP are now modernising the system so people are informed in that way. But isn't there then also a risk specifically for pensioners who may be digitally excluded because of this movement to a modernised system, that again something like this could happen in the future?
I thank the honourable friend for that point, and she makes a good point. It is a side point to the main point, but nevertheless, the PHSO have pinpointed this, and these are debates for another day. And I suspect it is for my right honourable member for East Ham and his committee to look at in more detail. But I think the PHSO have shone a spotlight on a wider problem. The aims of the APPG, which I co-chair with the honourable member for Salford and Eccles, are threefold. Firstly, to represent those women who have been treated unjustly by the short notice changes to the state pension age. According to WASPI, 280,000 have now died since the start of their campaign. Secondly, to develop and promote policy solutions to support 1950s-born women and their families who do not have access to their pension and are facing mental and physical health consequences. And thirdly, to feed the views and experiences of 1950s-born women into future policy decisions relating to the state pension and welfare. Over the years, we have had regular evidence-gathering sessions with the various representative groups, and we have considered policies and initiatives as to how best to help and assist them. In January 2022, the APPG made their own submission to the PHSO as to the level of compensation that should be provided. I would like to give special thanks to the honourable member for Denton and Reddish for the work that he and his office did in putting this together. Based on the evidence that had been presented to us from right across the UK, we reached what for us was the logical conclusion that level 6 of the PHSO's compensation scale should apply. We did subsequently refine this recommendation by proposing that compensation should be provided in a bell curve, with those who received least notice of the longest postponement receiving the most, and those who received the longer notice of a shorter increase receiving lesser sums. I will give.
May I take the opportunity to thank my honourable friend for his key role in the APPG, and also to put on record the dignified and well-informed views of local coordinators of WASPI in my part of the world, Sheila Simmons and Sal Robinson. But may I ask him, we heard earlier an intervention which was saying about judging each case on its individual circumstances. Now, I can see the merit of that, but I can also see that that would have a devastating effect on the speed with which we would come to conclusions. What's the balance that he thinks should be struck on those two factors?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and hopefully I will. My sense is that there is a need to strike a balance. That is what the PHSO themselves say. My sense is that in the work that the APPG are doing, in the work that the Select Committee are doing, a way forward is beginning to emerge, and I will elaborate on that. Now, since the PHSO published their report on 21st March, the APPG have been seeking to play our role as part of Parliament in finding as quickly as possible a fair and just mechanism, as the PHSO asked Parliament to do. The honourable member for Salford and Eccles and myself wrote to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and we have subsequently met my honourable friend, the Minister, who is now back in his place, and I thank him for the hearing that he gave us. Last Tuesday, we both appeared before the Work and Pensions Select Committee, And likewise, I am grateful to the Right Honourable Member for East Ham and his colleagues for the fair and full reception that they provided. We are also holding our own evidence sessions with the various representative groups. The first 3 of these took place on Monday, and more are to follow. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a complicated matter, and whilst the APPG is yet to reach a settled and final recommendation as to the form that a compensation mechanism should take, I think that it is fair to say that ideas are fast evolving and are pointing in a particular direction. I'll give way.
I wonder if you can advise the House about those recommendations to WASPI women in West Berkshire and across the UK, if one of those recommendations will be for a ministerial apology on behalf of the department for where we are now.
Hear, hear. I thank the Honourable for that intervention. What I would say, if you look at what the PHSO say, and what way forward should be, that encapsulates an apology included, is part of what the DWP should be coming up with. If you look at the DWP's own guidelines, they include an apology as well in such instances. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I shall focus on the issue of the form of compensation redress that is emerging in a little more detail. Whilst the PHSO have suggested compensation should be paid at level 4 on their scale, there is disquiet among those affected that this is too low, and level 6 should apply in line with the APPG's recommendation. The PHSO comment that a flat rate is easiest to implement, but it is not perfect, and there may well be a need for a balancing act, as indeed my right honourable friend to my side suggested in his intervention a few minutes ago. They also suggest that the National Audit Office may be able to provide guidance as to how to structure a compensation scheme. The WASPI Group have emphasised, as we've heard, the need for speed, simplicity and sensitivity, and they recommend that the DWP bring forward proposals of a financial redress scheme to Parliament before the summer recess. They also propose that higher payments should be targeted at those most impacted. The Select Committee are to be commended for getting out their recommendations less than 10 days after their evidence session. They also asked the Government to bring forward proposals for the summer recess. They too propose that payments should be based on the extent of change to an individual's state pension age and the notice of change that they received. They add that there should be some flexibility for individuals to be able to make the case for a higher level of compensation based on experiencing direct financial loss. Mr. Deputy Speaker, clear parameters as to the form of that compensation to take, I sense, are rapidly evolving. Parliament, in the past 2 months, since the PHSO published their report, in its various different guises, is playing its role to the full. I would suggest that now is the time for government to very much step up to the plate. A mechanism should be put in place before the summer recess. I acknowledge that the matter is complicated and there is need for contemplation and reflection. But we should have in mind that the most notable achievement, I would suggest, of this government is that under enormous pressure, in a very short timescale, they put in place the furlough scheme, which saved hundreds of thousands of jobs and got us through COVID. There is no reason, Mr. Deputy Speaker, why government cannot move with such speed and alacrity again. I would add that failure to do so, not to comply with the PHSO's recommendations, would be almost completely unprecedented over the 70 years that the Ombudsman has existed, and would drive a coach and horses through what is an integral part of our parliamentary system of democratic checks and balances. Mr Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, I support this motion.
Hannah Bardell.
Very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Noted. I firstly want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Arran. Her opening speech was blistering and brilliant, and I think she speaks for many of our constituents and for those members who cannot be here today. And we have to remember, as other members have said, that WASPI women are not just some distant, transient group. They're real people with real lives. And this injustice has had real impacts. Their mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, sisters, aunts, carers, daughters, and many of them have passed away just during the process of us trying to secure justice for them. And I find it remarkable, actually, that the Ombudsman report has got so, and the Ombudsman itself has such little faith in the government that it is turning to Parliament to try and find a resolution and a remedy. And we owe it to those WASPI women. We have taken office, all of us, we have taken an oath of office to our constituents and to those WASPI women to find a resolution and to find a solution, because it has sadly become the business of this government to kick the can down the road on whatever issue it is, whether it's the Horizon scandal, whether it's Primados, whether it's contaminated blood. It seems to have become an ingrained and institutional habit to kick the can down the road and make those who have suffered at the hands of government wait even longer. And I would suggest that, a member opposite made a point about the cost of redress and the cost of remedy. And of course, we have to recognise that. But in doing so, we also have to recognise the money that has been spent by the civil service, the money and time that has been spent just by our constituency staff and all of us. And I would suspect that the amount of money that has been spent on this report and the time is probably almost equal to the money that needs to be paid to bring WASPI women redress. And while we're looking at what remedies we can find and what money can be sought, perhaps we should be looking at proceeds of crime money. Perhaps we should be looking at the Russian oligarchs who need to have their assets seized or have had their assets seized, and proper sanctions against those who launder money and the dirty money that flows through the financial institutions of the United Kingdom. Because I've sat on bills in this House and seen the government take lacklustre approach and action. The money is there. It's about political will, as my honourable friend said. And I have had many representations from the 6,500 WASPI women in my Livingston constituency. And today, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to give them a voice. Constituents like Shirley Sharp, who was born in October 1954. She took early retirement from the Scottish Government in December 2008, she said, when she was 54. Before deciding to leave, she contacted the Pension Service and received her forecast. She said, "I knew when I left my job I would receive my pension on the 6th of the 3rd, 2019, when I was 64 years and 6 months old. After I left, another 18 months was added to my pension, which I couldn't make provision for. To add insult to injury," she said, "my husband is 8 months older than me and he received his pension 14 months before I did. If it was about equality, why was I penalised 6 months more than a male counterpart? I've been in receipt of my state pension now since the 6th of 9, 2020. I am still very angry about this whole thing, how this whole thing has been handled." Another constituent who didn't want to be named took early retirement from the civil service and looked after elderly relatives for 4 years until 11 months before her 60th birthday. At that point, her sister asked if she was planning on getting a part-time job. She said she was exhausted and she could manage financially as long as she got her pension in 11 months' time. She couldn't believe it when she was told that her pension age would be 66. She thought the DWP were, in her words, pulling her leg. Now, I phoned the DWP, who confirmed that, she said, and she'd never had any communication whatsoever. Another constituent, Anne Seenan, she missed out on £14,000, having had her state pension delayed by 2 years. She said, "I never received any communication from the Department of Work and Pensions." Another constituent, Diane Risbrigger. "Unfortunately," she said, "I'm one of the women affected by a chronic, life-limiting illness which adds to the distress, as well as being born a mere 3 weeks after the cut-off date for appealing, so a double whammy in her case." And another constituent who I know is watching, Jill Parton, an incredible woman who I know well. She says, "Unfortunately, I'm one of the tens of thousands of women born in the 1950s who've been badly affected by the rapid rise in state pension age for women. I worked part-time while I was training to become a teacher and started full-time working in August 1975 when I was 20. I always expected I would receive my state pension at the age of 60. I married in 1977 and worked full-time. She took 6 months off to have both of her children, and her husband and her separated before her son was born. She found out that she wouldn't receive her state pension at 60 during a staff meeting, and she reminded me today that her divorce settlement, like many of our constituents, was predicated on when she was going to get her state pension. She unfortunately also lives with the diagnosis of diffuse corneal dystrophy, and the unpredictability of that meant she couldn't teach because of the impact that teaching under bright lights would have had. She said, "I find it very difficult to understand the government's position on this. While they are making tens of thousands of women work until they're 66, we have even more young people who can't get jobs. For the mental health of all concerned, would it not be more economical to allow the 60-plus women to retire and the young jobless to have the jobs of those women?" Mental health worries affect many people, and she is deeply concerned about the impact that it will have, and that it has had not just on her, but any others. The bottom line, Mr Deputy Speaker, is this was a social contract between our constituents and the government. And many of these women have suffered great discrimination throughout their lives, have not been able to pay their full stamp, as it was called back in the day, and had no idea. Now, it's not good enough for some to say that communication was adequate. Putting out a press release is not proper communication. And this is something that the government will need to get a grip on and understand the profound impact that it has had on other constituents of mine: Susan Aitken, Cho Atkinson, Shirley Sharp, Elizabeth Donnelly, Linda Howison, Meg Wilson, Marion Wright, Margaret Diamond, Anne Waugh, Gloria Fairgrieve. I wanted to read their names out because they're real people with real lives, and this is having a real impact on them. If there is one decent thing that this government could do before it's booted out of office, is give the WASPy women the justice that they deserve.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak today on behalf of the 6,180 women across Stockton South affected by this issue. Women who I come across every day in all corners of my constituency and from all walks of life. In fact, even my own mother is a WASPy woman. She found out whilst chatting to her sister. Knowing my mother, that will have been an interesting conversation. I've had many conversations with constituents about the issue and the impact this has had on their lives. None of them dispute the need to equalise the pension age with men. They all understand the challenges of communicating this change to the public, but they want justice and fair treatment from the system they have spent their lives paying into. I realise we've arrived at this point after years of debate under governments of both colours, but we have arrived at this point where an independent ombudsman has told us that WASPy women were wronged, that maladministration has occurred, and that there should be compensation for those women affected. The system that these women paid into all their lives was meant to provide them with the comfort in retirement. They based their life plans around it, and now the PHSO report confirms it was changed without adequate notice. This has had a huge impact on those affected and their families, women who lost the chance to make informed decisions in preparing for retirement. I've heard stories of women who worked all their lives and deserved to retire with dignity, but have instead been forced to rely on help from their husbands or even their children. And those most affected are often those already vulnerable, widows and those living alone, those with health issues, those who are already facing financial hardship. I'm glad that we now have the Ombudsman's report, but this issue has gone on for way too long. These women have waited a long time for justice, and as we've heard, for some it is now way too late. I'd like to pay tribute to all those WASPy women in my constituency and further afield who've campaigned tirelessly for for years and exhausted every avenue to right this wrong. I urge the Government to consider the report as quickly as possible and ensure that WASPI women get the fair and fast compensation that they deserve. Thank you.
Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Waveney for his comments, which I very much associate myself with, and his hard work over these years on the all-party parliamentary group. I also thank the Honourable Member for Ayrshire and Arran and the Backbench Business Committee for securing this very important debate. Now, we all know how we got here. And for people watching at home, many women born in the 1950s retired at 60 in the belief that they would receive their full state pension, only to realise that the government had increased the retirement age by 5 years and not told them. Many handed their notice in at work, and in many cases these women were forced to exist on meagre benefits that left them living a hand-to-mouth existence. Many were left destitute, some even lost their homes, many experienced depression, and some were even suicidal. Now that is a scandal. It's a clear injustice. And I do have to give my warmest thanks to all the 1950s Women's State Pension Inequality Campaign groups on behalf of the Honourable Member for Waveney, myself and all members of the all-party group. I also want to thank the 5,000 women in my own constituency of Salford and Eccles who were born in the 1950s, and in particular a lady called Judith Robertson and the women of the WASPI Campaign 2018, who've held everything from street stalls in our local supermarkets through to lobbying myself and other MPs on this important issue. I know we're all here today because of those brave women, and we all recognise their determination and strength. And it's that relentless campaigning and strength against this profound injustice is the reason why we're here today. Now, today, the issue is finally not just a question of whether these women faced injustice. The Ombudsman's report makes clear that they did, that the DWP was guilty of maladministration, that these women are entitled to urgent compensation from the government, and that Parliament must urgently identify a mechanism for this. Now, I'll very briefly make a few comments about the Ombudsman's report for clarity. And I think firstly it's important to stress that in the case of injustice, the Ombudsman has only looked at one aspect. They've looked at maladministration by the DWP, i.e. did they adequately notify women affected by the change of their change in pension age. The Ombudsman's remit was not to look at the wider discriminatory impact of the policy itself, and that matter is still left unaddressed. The UK's pension system has sadly systematically favoured men within this age group. They often receive higher state pensions and even higher private pensions. Many of these women spent significant periods out of the workforce caring for their children and family members, coupled with a gender pay gap which was far more acute during their time in the workforce than it is today. So they already were at a disadvantage in terms of their ability to contribute to their private and state pensions. And the only element that went in some small way to addressing that apparent gender pensions gap was that the national insurance pension was paid to women from age 60, whereas it was paid to men from age 65. But obviously this advantage was taken away. Now, this issue of the fairness and the gender impact of the policy itself is certainly one that needs to be urgently addressed, and I hope it's one that we all continue to fight on in this House. But focusing very specifically on the Ombudsman's findings today, I think, firstly, the key finding was that the failure by the DWP to adequately inform thousands of women that their state pension age constitutes maladministration. They also found that as a result, some women had lost opportunities to make informed decisions about their finances, and that the DWP's failure had diminished the women's sense of personal autonomy and financial control. The Ombudsman also recommended that the DWP should acknowledge its failings and apologise for the impact that it had had on those affected. And they conclude very clearly within the report that the women concerned are entitled to urgent compensation. Now, we've had some discussion today about what a remedy itself could look like, and the report is very clear that it leaves that open to Parliament to determine. And crucially, they say that finite resources should not be used as an excuse for failing to provide fair remedies. This is a clear injustice. It should be treated as one. And if we go down the path of deciding which is a deserving injustice and which is not a deserving injustice, then we're on very dangerous territory. Now, they do also point out that HM Treasury requires compensation schemes to be efficient, effective and deliver value for money. In particular, any administrative costs associated with compensation schemes should not be excessive. And that's why it then leads on the Ombudsman to suggest that while Parliament might favour a mechanism for assessing individual claims for injustice, it might want to consider a flat rate payment would deliver a more efficient resolution. And I think there's a note of caution here. It's important to consider carefully the impact how this could work in our deliberations, as some women may be paid far less compensation than they otherwise should be entitled to. Now, on the levels of redress themselves, the Ombudsman's guidance on financial remedy, as we've heard from the Honourable Member for Waveney, sets out 6 levels of compensation. The Ombudsman suggests that solely in the very small set of cases that it assessed 6 cases, they suggested that for those cases, the range could be level 4. But in further sessions with the Department for Work and Pensions Select Committee last week, they acknowledged that this small subset may not address all of the extreme financial situations many women affected have faced, and that this can be addressed by the appropriate redress mechanism Parliament looks at accordingly. I think it's also important to stress that all of the women's campaign groups that have contacted the all-party group so far have stated that any decision to set the level at 4 would be grossly insufficient. And I agree. When gathering the evidence, the all-party group found that in a vastly significant number of cases, the injustice was actually at level 6, and this was the recommendation that the all-party group made to the Ombudsman. Now, whatever option Parliament chooses, it's got a whole range that are being discussed at the moment, from a flat rate payment to a flat rate tapered payment, the bell curve the Honourable Member for Waveney spoke about, a flat rate payment with top-ups over a 5-year period, mediation with 1950s women alongside an initial payment to address the full scale of loss and discrimination faced. But whatever option Parliament chooses to take, it's important to ensure that it's not means-tested, it's fair, it's enshrined in legislation, and most importantly, it garners the support of those women affected. But there's one major hurdle before us today. Before we get to the point of even discussing and fine-tuning any proposals that the government has, the government first has to lay before Parliament its proposed redress mechanism. There's no excuse for delay. The report was laid before Parliament in March. It's now May, and still we have no government response. This is just not acceptable. We've heard that nearly 280,000 women have already died waiting for justice. And as we speak, at least one woman will die waiting for justice every 13 minutes. So I say to the government, just do the right thing. And as a matter of urgency, lay before Parliament a mechanism for redress so that we can all act in accordance with the Ombudsman's recommendations.
Stephen Bonnar.
Deputy Speaker, can I begin by commending my honourable friend, the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, not only for securing this debate today on the Ombudsman's report, but for her continued determination in representing these women, the WASPy women, and seeking the injustice that they have been so cruelly denied by their own government. Women like Mary Bartley from Bellshill, who came to my advice surgery just Friday there to ask me to come to this house today and ask this government to do the right thing by her and the thousands of other women who have had the rug pulled out from underneath them. She also spoke to me about some of the 280,000 women who have died during this fight for justice, and how, along with thousands others across my constituency of Coatbridge, Chryston and Bellshill, she will continue to fight for what they are entitled to. I want to put on record my thanks for Mary and the time that she spent informing me of the real and deep impact that this has had on her in her later life. Across Scotland, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's estimated that almost 356,000 women were impacted by the WASPy pension scandal. Many of the women affected were already in ill health. Others had taken early retirement and were planning to get by until the age of 60 when they thought they would receive their state pension. but Westminster Tories had a different idea. The UK Government instead invented reasons for countless delays in the hope that the WASPy women will simply go away. Well, I think they've proven they will not go away. No chance. Their campaign for justice continues. But I just wish to return to that figure. Some 280,000 women have now passed away without seeing the justice that was owed to them. As many as 40,000 women are dying every year without getting any form of compensation. This is outrageous and willful neglect of a duty of any government. It is actually shameful. It's an absolute betrayal of the most callous kind to those impacted by the UK government's maladministration. We welcome the findings of the PHSO's report, and it is clear that the Westminster Government must now take responsibility for the hardships that it has caused women born in the 1950s and makes urgent demands for the mistakes made. WASPy women have been struggling for years now with this injustice, and just about every other whim and decision that emanates from this place has also taken its toll. We've heard about the Horizon scandal, the infected blood scandal, but there's also the cut to pension credit for mixed-age couples, the froze, the hard-earned state pension of pensioners living overseas, and of course this government scrapped free TV licences for over 75, all of these impacting of course on WASPy women, and all of this on top of the self-inflicted cost of living crisis. It is just becoming too much for some of these women. The UK Government must not only apologise for the harms caused by the clear and obvious maladministration, it must now act urgently and deliver the justice and the compensation that these women so richly deserve. Mr Deputy Speaker, the report itself is clear and it is damning. It was made a finding of failings by the DWP in this case and has ruled that the women affected are owed compensation. And the PHSO's Chief Executive, Rebecca Hilser-Narf, said that the DWP has clearly indicated that it will refuse to comply. This is outrageous. It is totally unacceptable. The Department must do the right thing and it must be held to account for the failure to do so. To this very day, the DWP have not acknowledged its failings, and it has also failed to offer any apology or any explanation, and has indicated that it will not compensate women affected by its failure. The SNP here in Westminster and in Government in Holyrood have always supported and will continue to support the WASPy women in their valiant efforts. Yet many here in Westminster who have previously been very vocal in supporting the WASPy women have now fallen eerily silent. The very same can be said for prominent Tory and Labour figures up the road in Holyrood as well. And on the 1st of May, the Scottish Parliament moved a motion on women's state pension compensation, which, I quote, agreed that the UK Government must now urgently deliver on the Ombudsman's recommendations to pay compensation in full to those women without delay. Now, that motion passed in the Scottish Parliament, passed by votes from the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Greens and the Labour Party. The Tories and the Labour Party shamefully abstained on that vote, and I think that speaks volume. It speaks a lot more than the silence that comes from those benches. And I have to say, if the WASPy women are pinning their hopes on an incoming Labour administration, they probably need to prepare themselves for yet more despair. Why? Why is that? Well, they only need to look and familiarise themselves at the lens that the Labour administration in North Lanarkshire Council went to avoid paying out on equal pay claims owed to women over many, many years, spending millions upon millions of pounds in the process and legal fees to fight these justified claims, and then losing. The same happened, as we've heard, in Labour-run Glasgow City Council. These two parties are not interested in equality for women. The evidence is before us, friends. So forgive me if I have no faith whatsoever in the change that the Labour Party are purporting to offer.
They could, of course, surprise us. They could support the State Pension Age Compensation Bill in the name of my honourable friend from Kilmarnock and Loudoun, of which I am a co-sponsor. The UK Government and the Labour Party could and they should back his bill and immediately set up a compensation scheme for all those women affected. We know that they won't, but we're asking them here today. We're reinforcing those calls. And it is clear that only a strong SNP voice in Holyrood and here in Westminster can hold this UK Government to account, whether that any Westminster Government to account, whether it be a Tory or a Labour-led government. Of course I will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. We've heard demands that the Secretary of State here should apologise, and quite clearly they should. But he will remember that 10 years ago, almost to this day, a very senior former Labour Prime Minister was doing rounds in Scotland, speaking at meetings of middle-aged and elderly people, promising them categorically their pensions were safe with any United Kingdom government. Does my honourable friend believe that it is now time that an apology came from that politician for the way that he deceived and misled millions of people in Scotland?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He makes an excellent point. It was one of the mistruths that were promised during that campaign. Of course, we were told we would retain our place in the European Union as well. But these women have completely been shafted, for want of a better term, by these politicians who were charged with delivering justice for them. And I think he's made an excellent point here today. We, the SNP, the Scottish Government in Holyrood, stands ready to engage with the Department of Work and Pensions when the UK Government finally agrees to compensate these WASPy women. And we still hope that this government will agree to compensate these women, because justice should be done. After years of promises made by Tory MPs, Labour MPs and MSPs, those parties are both now refusing to accept the report's recommendation to fully compensate these women who have been impacted. It is time for the Tory and Labour Party to stop dithering, to put the funding in place so that these women can get the justice they deserve before it is too late. And it should also be crystal clear once again. And this is not an extreme proposition, and it should not be seen as such, but the only way to protect Scotland's pensioners from the whims of Westminster governments and to ensure dignity and fairness in retirement is for Scotland to have the full powers of its independence.
Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And this is an issue very close to my heart, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran and the Backbench Business Committee for this opportunity to speak today in the Chamber. But some of the members in this House are not working on the goodwill of cross-party work and the consensus that there has been, particularly that's been led by my honourable friend and the other co-chair for the APPG. And I thank them for their work. I've been acutely aware of the 1950s women's state pension injustice for a very long time. I have family and friends impacted by this, as well as thousands of constituents. And since I was elected in 2017, I have written and met with numerous women in Gower born in the 1950s who have shared their experiences and told me of the profound impact that this has had on their lives. I've led an adjournment debate on the matter back in 2019 and have worked to represent women affected throughout my time as an MP by supporting their complaints to the Ombudsman and speaking at every opportunity. But the then Conservative Chancellor's decision to accelerate increases in the state pension age in the Pensions Act in 2011 produced considerable hardship for many women, and as it meant a lot of them received very little notice of their increase in state pension age, and the government failed to communicate the changes effectively. Some women were only given 1 year's notice, others got up to 5, but many received none at all. And this put women in a really serious position. Women who had already made plans on previous pension statements, having to scramble on and continue to work to make ends meet. Women whose income in retirement is already significantly affected by unequal and low pay at work, pregnancy discrimination, discrimination against part-time workers, and a lack of affordable childcare and carer support. And only recently, my constituent Carrie Williams came to see me in a surgery, and she was one of the first cohort of women affected. Initial leaflets on changes stated that increase to 65 would happen in 2020. She then received a letter in 2013 informing her that the changes would be enforced from 2018 and will then gradually increase. That meant that she had to wait not until 65 but until her 66th birthday, an additional extra year, before being able to receive her state pension. Following a period of poor health and the knowledge that she wouldn't be getting her pension for several more years, it made her increasingly stressed, and combined with other issues that she was having with the DWP at the time, affected her income. This led to her being ill and to having seizures. Correspondence of the various changes were littered with suggestions of her paying for a financial advisor, something that she couldn't afford to do as a single mother and in such poor health. And it just she wasn't the person that had any spare cash lying around to set up a new savings pot or an ISA or something else that was emphasised as an apparent solution to her problem. But I'm glad to share that Carrie is in good health now, but unfortunately, like many other women affected, it's not the end of it. Not only did she have to wait unexpectedly until 66 to access her state pension, the amount she receives from it has drastically reduced year on year due to fiscal drag. And I wouldn't have believed it, Mr Deputy Speaker, unless she hadn't brought me about 6 or 7 years of evidence of this happening. And this Conservative government's recklessness with our economy is squeezing everyone's finances, and I saw it with my own eyes. It is exacerbating the hardships that these WASPy women have already endured. It's been a long and frustrated process for the women affected, and there are several groups that represent them. WASPy is probably the most well-known, but I'd also like to mention the Pension Justice for Swansea Women campaign, which includes women from my constituency and others in the local area. But a lot was hinging on the Ombudsman report. It took some time, but now we have it. It's a serious report that requires serious consideration. But the government cannot use it to continue kicking the can down the road as they've done over the last 14 years. The report found the DWP guilty of maladministration. The Secretary of State said in March he would provide a further update to this House on this matter, but is still yet to do so. He should update Parliament or tell us when he is finally going to do this. While there are strong feelings and a variety of asks, the overarching issue here is that there has been an injustice that must be addressed. Lessons have got to be learnt to ensure that this never reoccurs, Mr Deputy Speaker, and that everyone has the right to properly plan for their retirement. Thank you.
John Healy.
Sorry. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend from North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate today, and also for the Backbench business for granting the debate. It's my privilege to speak on behalf of WASPy women, and in particular the Falkirk WASPy women group, who have been with me for quite a long time. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I held a public meeting in my Falkirk constituency way back in 2015 for all the WASPy women, approximately 7,000 affected by the state pension age, the change, and discovered that many, the overwhelming majority of them who attended, hadn't received any notification of these changes. The majority of the women were only 1 year away from the original retirement age of 60 years and now faced a further 6 years of working life without any warning. Many had already started to make plans to retire due to ill health, caring duties for grandchildren and or elderly parents. It wasn't just the women who were badly affected by these changes, but family members who had also to make changes in or other arrangements in their life. Mr Deputy Speaker, a cohort of the Falkirk women got together and formed the Falkirk Group in 2016 and made arrangements to join the very first demo in June 16 down here in London. Since then, they have participated in other demos, both here and in Scotland, and in 2019 they published and produced a calendar where all the proceeds went to breast cancer research. Deputy Speaker, local coordinator Anne Campbell and myself have had many discussions and meetings regarding this issue, along with other stalwarts of the group, namely May Roots, Mag Burns, Lorna Binney, Sheila Hartness, Elizabeth Lumsden, Maureen MacLeod, Valerie Sutter, Ruth McIntosh, Helen Reader, May Farrell, Elspeth Slater, and the many, many more women campaigning on this total injustice. And I pay tribute to them all. The Falkirk women are very positive. They are strong in their endeavour to right this wrong that was hoisted upon them in the most cruelest and calculating way. And I praise them for their organisational skills and the rest of the WASPI women. They would like an apology and compensation for the turmoil that was thrust upon them. They want respect and dignity, and most importantly, a fair and a fast compensation scheme to redress this injustice. And it is fair to say that these women are not going away, so ignore them at your peril. These WASPI women need an answer. They need it now. No more unnecessary delays. This present government can and it should resolve this pitiful state of affairs here and now. Do the right and proper thing and put an end to this bureaucratic shambles. The government can't procrastinate any longer. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, action is required, not more words. Stop insulting these WASPI women any further and compensate them now with speed and with simplicity. Thank you.
Yes, Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I pay tribute to all of those WASPI women and others campaigning on this issue in Wirral West and across the UK and in the gallery this afternoon. I stand in solidarity with them, and I myself am a 1950s-born woman. I pay tribute to all who have sadly passed away too. I believe it's important to consider the broader pensions landscape and the discriminatory and, quite frankly, sexist nature of provision that has adversely affected 1950s-born women. For example, rules that required a fixed number of qualifying years to be eligible for a pension have disproportionately adversely affected women. In 1973, the right to a deferred pension was introduced for those who left service on or after the 6th of April 1975, providing that they were over 25 years old and had completed at least 5 years' service. One WASPI campaigner told me that she had worked for the Army for 4 years and then left after she had had her baby. She received no pension for those years. That is grotesquely unfair. That 5-year qualifying period, which clearly discriminated against women, was reduced to 2 years from April 1988, and so it remains for the Army and Civil Service today. Again, I believe that this is discriminatory, and I would ask the Minister to look into this. Part-time workers have similarly been adversely affected by the design of pension schemes. There is insufficient time to provide detail here. However, clearly women have been disproportionately affected by this too, as they are by the current earnings threshold of £10,000 a year for auto-enrolment. And again, I ask the Minister to look at addressing this discriminatory element of an otherwise very important policy which affects large numbers of women and men on low pay. So 1950s-born women had already been adversely affected by pensions policy. The pensions gender gap is still high. Analysis by the DWP published in 2023 puts the gender pension gap at 35%, which means that women have 35% less private pension wealth than men at age 55, the minimum age at which most people can start to take their pension. And women have less state pension too. Analysis by the IFS last year showed that women born in the early 1950s receive around 5% less state pension income than men. The reasons included having spent less time in paid employment compared to women born in later periods, the way that the rules for entitlement to the state pension before the introduction of the new state pension in 2016 created a significant gap between pensions for men and women, and, for example, before 1978, married women could opt to pay a married woman's stamp, and this meant they paid lower national insurance contributions and then received a lower state pension. It is scandalous too that many of the women who paid the married women's stamp did not receive all of the pension that they should have been entitled to due to the complex rules and computer errors by the DWP. And then, of course, the gender pay gap means that women are paying on average less into their occupational pensions. So all of these things are still affecting women today. And so it is in this context that I ask the Minister to act swiftly in relation to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman report on women's state pension age. The WASPI campaign has shone a light on how the changes affected women. Many 1950s-born women found out about the changes to their state pension age at a time that was too late for them to alter their retirement plans. Others have said that they had no idea that they would have to wait longer to receive their state pension. As a result, many women have suffered financial hardship and emotional distress. A survey of around 8,000 WASPy women carried out in December of last year found that in the previous 6 months, 55% of WASPy women saw their economic position get worse, 49% of WASPy women had struggled to pay essential bills, and shockingly, 25% of WASPy women had struggled to buy food. As we have heard from members right across this House, constituents have spoken about how they have been personally affected. One woman in Wirral West told me of how she struggled to feed herself and had to sell her home as a result of how she was affected. Another constituent wrote to me recently to say that she feels robbed of her future and she still feels that she's being ignored. It is insulting to those women that the Minister has barely acknowledged the clear maladministration that the Ombudsman says occurred. So can the Minister tell us today when his department will acknowledge that maladministration and will he apologise for it? Because of significant concerns that the Ombudsman has that DWP will fail to remedy the injustice, the Ombudsman has taken the rare decision to bring matters to Parliament's attention and specifically to ask Parliament to intervene and identify a mechanism for providing appropriate remedy. And the Ombudsman's report sets out what that remedy might look like. It also says that it is open to DWP to forestall this process by acting on what the Ombudsman says to Parliament. So will the Minister take this opportunity to do just that, to look carefully at what the Ombudsman says and come forward with fair and fast compensation for the women affected? Jane Cowley, the WASPy campaign manager, said last week at the Work and Pension Select Committee and oral evidence hearing that we have attempted to meet with the Minister throughout our campaign, but unfortunately those requests have never been accepted. This is incredibly disappointing. The campaign is acting on behalf of 3.5 million women adversely affected. It is utterly astonishing. The Minister should show them such little respect. Time is of the essence for the government to put things right. According to the WASPy campaign group, by this weekend, 280,000 WASPy women will have died since their fight for justice began. To put it another way, as has already been said in this House, one woman dies every 13 minutes. The government talks about supporting all pensioners to have a dignified retirement. Can the Minister honestly stand there and say that his government is treating these WASPy women with the dignity and respect that they deserve? Last week at the Select Committee's oral evidence hearing, Angela Madden, the chair of the WASPy campaign, expressed frustration that the DWP have never accepted that they've done anything wrong. When will the government remedy that injustice so that so many 1950s-born women have faced? Ministers must apologise to those women who have suffered as a result of government failings, and they must, as a matter of urgency, bring forward fair and fast compensation.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Deputy Speaker, and I commend the member for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate and the Backbench Business Committee for granting it, but I do think it's disappointing that the Government has not sought to have a debate on this issue in Government time, particularly when there is quite clearly a cross-party consensus about the need for speed in relation to this following the Ombudsman's report. So I hope the Minister will be coming forward with some clear proposals today about where we go, but I hope he is also hearing how strongly the feeling is across the House that the Government need to do something quickly. So on Monday we had an impassioned debate in this place about the role of members, and there was speech after speech stating those of us in this place must uphold the highest standards and that we must set the best example of good practice. And there were arguments made by others about the importance of democracy and representation, and I may not have agreed with the conclusions they reached from those arguments in many cases, but I cannot fault their dedication to this place and the job that we do here on behalf of our constituents. And we should all therefore be able to support the basic idea that when someone is wronged and that when an independent body investigates and makes recommendations for recompense, then those must be actioned. And the member for South West Bedfordshire, who is no longer in his place, made a very important point about the fact that we as constituency MPs do refer constituents on to the Ombudsman. How can any of us continue to do that in the future if the Government and indeed this place chooses to ignore recommendations made by that Ombudsman? The Government is not above the law, Mr Deputy Speaker, and we are here representing our constituents. And it is damning that the report from the Ombudsman has had to be sent back to Parliament by them because, in their words, they've had significant concerns that the DWP would fail to remedy the injustice and acknowledge the maladministration. What does that say? And I expect the Minister is going to say that the Department needs more time to consider their response. And I think, having heard and listened to the other members who have participated in this debate so far, I think many of us have no time for that anymore. And certainly WASPy women do not either. And I listened with interest to the Honourable Member for Wirral West in relation to the fact that we know that female pensioners are most likely to be living in poverty. And she made a very powerful and compelling case for that acknowledges that. And the reality is, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the gender pension gap continues to this day because the gender pay gap also continues. And unless we have a social security system and a pension system that actually recognises the work that women do and are more likely to do from a caring perspective, which I've obviously done a lot of work on in relation to my Carers Leave Act, but just generally the fact that they are more likely to work part-time or have time out of the workplace means that they are always going to experience lower levels of state pension.
Would she give way?
Yes, I'm happy to give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for giving way. Mr Deputy Speaker, the injustice that WASPy women have faced is simply shameful. The financial burden has been outlined today, but the anxiety that they feel is huge. A constituent contacted me to tell me that the ordeal had had an enormous and horrible derogatory effect on her mental health as well, because she simply feels so powerless to do anything about it. So does the honourable member agree with me that this government should immediately confirm that they will honour the recommendations on the Ombudsman and come forward with a proper plan to compensate the millions of affected women?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I absolutely agree with her. We have now had the report for some time. I think the government should be making a statement to say that they support it, and it's quite clear that there has been plenty of work done, both by the APPG and the Ombudsman themselves, to outline what a compensation scheme should look like. But you're right in terms of that mental impact. A constituent of mine, Heather, I met with her several weeks ago, and she's a single woman, so she has not, the assumption that women have, a partner or spouse's income to rely on, and she's had to give up work earlier as a teacher than she expected due to ill health, and she feels that she has been, the injustice has been compounded for her by the fact that the government has not yet acknowledged the Ombudsman's report properly. The DWP have had full notice, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the investigation by the PHSO and its findings, and I would argue should have therefore had the opportunity to plan accordingly. And indeed, if we think about the infected blood scandal, the government has said that when the report is finally going to be published this coming Monday, it will make a statement and what it's going to do very quickly thereafter. So I feel unmoved by the argument that they need more time to respond to the Ombudsman's report when we've known for some time that that was coming too. The first report in relation to maladministration was published almost 3 years ago, and so therefore I just don't accept that the government and the DWP have not had the time to consider the likely outcome of the findings. We've known that a recommendation for compensation was likely to be on its way, and so therefore I would have expected the DWP to have started to make plans for administering it. And I just want to raise something that while I've been sitting here in the chamber, I've been notified by my researcher that I've had a response to a written parliamentary question which stated that the department did not have sight of a draft copy of the PHSO's report at the end of last year. Now, in that time, my researcher has also confirmed with the WASPy campaign, and I've met with Angela Madden and others several times, where they say that that is not the case, that the government did have sight of that draft report. So I'd be really grateful for clarity from the Minister in that. I'm happy to give way to him just now, or in his closing remarks, about that written parliamentary question response. Is it correct that the government did not have sight of that draft report at the end of last year?
Opposite to complain that the fact that I dip my head in order to listen is somehow evident of me not listening. I take exception to the criticism of the stance of my body position.
Comments stand on the record. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, and I certainly wasn't suggesting that from the Minister. What I'm saying is I've got two different versions of events here. I've got the WASPy campaign saying that the draft report was not seen, it was seen by the DWP at the end of last year, and I've got a written response from the government saying that it was not. If the written parliamentary question is found to be inaccurate, I'd be grateful if the Minister would write to me, and I'd be grateful if he would place that letter in the Commons Library if he's not able to confirm in his closing remarks. Because I've done a lot of work with the Minister. Previously, he was heavily involved with me for the APPG for ending the need for food banks. And so therefore I know that he cares about people, but I really do not want to hear that this is the department just being thorough in the closing remarks today. Because like many here, I've met with WASPI women, I've met with the campaigners who stand in the rain outside Parliament on budget days, I've spoken to the group leaders, I've spoken to my constituents in North East Fife, and the one message that they want me to bring here today is that they are dying. That they are dying without the DWP admitting to their errors, without any acknowledgement of the impact that this has had on their lives, without compensation, without resolution. And frankly, they now feel that the government is waiting for them to die, for the problem to literally cease to exist. The WASPI women deserve compensation. That's not just my view or the view of many members in this House, it's the view of the Ombudsman. If we in this place can't be adhering to the findings of the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman, what message are we sending from this place generally? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I was plunged into huge anger, upset, distress. I felt like I had been scammed. Why hadn't anyone told me that my pension age had been changed? Why hadn't I known about it? These are the words of Hillary, who, like millions of other women born in the 1950s, was hit by the change in the state pension age. Hillary was left tens of thousands of pounds worse off. She had budgeted for her state pension beginning at 60, not 6 years later. She struggled to make ends meet and started to look for another job. But she asked, who's going to employ a woman in her late 50s? She wasn't alone. Millions of women born in the 1950s were robbed of their pensions. A survey carried out by the Women Against State Pension Inequality campaign, whose tireless advocacy I'd like to pay tribute to today, particularly WASPI women in Coventry South, found that half the women they surveyed struggled to pay essential bills. 1 in 4 struggled to put food on the table, but it wasn't just the financial hit. It was the worry, it was the stress, it was the feeling that they had made a mistake, that it was their fault that they didn't know that the pension age had changed. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Ombudsman's report puts that to bed once and for all. The fault for not knowing was not with these women, the fault was with the government, and it was with the Department for Work and Pensions. There was maladministration in communicating these changes, and an injustice was done. That's what the Ombudsman concluded, and it utterly vindicates the WASPI campaign. But Mr Deputy Speaker, justice delayed is justice denied, and every 30 minutes a WASPI woman passes away and is forever denied justice. Since the beginning of their campaign, 280,000 women affected by the pension change have passed away, never to see this wrong righted. So Mr Deputy Speaker, it is utterly scandalous that the government seems intent on dragging its feet for as long as it can. On the 24th of March, after the Ombudsman's report was published, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions told this House he would respond, and I quote, without undue delay. But almost 2 months have passed, another 6,000 WASPI women have passed away, and still this government is doing nothing. Still, the government has failed to heed the report's recommendation to, and I quote, identify a mechanism for providing appropriate remedy for those who have suffered an injustice. And really, that is no surprise. The report concluded, and I quote, that it strongly doubts the DWP will provide a remedy to the injustice. And so, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is up to this place and all of our colleagues to rise up to this challenge and to right this wrong. And we have a recent example of that happening. After the Post Office Horizon scandal that was brought to life in a TV drama, the government responded to public outcry and introduced legislation to address the injustice. It was the right thing to do, but it shouldn't take Toby Jones and ITV for the government to do its job. It needs to act, and it needs to act now. And so, Mr Deputy Speaker, I will finish with this. The Ombudsman's report is right that injustice was done. These women lost out. Some were made tens of thousands of pounds worse off by these changes. They were made to feel like they had made a mistake, as if the fault was theirs. The stress and pain has been immense. And so I will conclude by saying that not only must the government compensate these women as a matter of urgency, but it must go beyond what has been recommended by the Ombudsman, which is not nearly enough to cover the hurt, the distress and the lost income faced by many of these women. And so I joined the WASPI campaign in calling for fast and fair compensation, giving justice to women who have been denied it for too long already. Thank you.
Very good. Dorrance.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. May I also thank the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate and for her unflinching commitment and support for WASPI women everywhere. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is an important issue for me and has been for a number of years. In fact, so important that I chose to raise it as a matter of urgency during my maiden speech in this chamber in 2020, and I highlighted the scandalous situation experienced by these women. Mr Deputy Speaker, there were an estimated 3.8 WASPI women, although 280,000 have since died since the start of this campaign, including my constituents, Margaret and Morag Syne, who died without receiving the compensation, apology or justice they rightly deserved. There are about 6,800 WASPI women in my Ayr, Carrick and Connaught constituency, and to some people, these are just numbers. To me, every single one of them is an individual, a daughter, possibly a mother, a grandmother, a wife, a sister, an auntie, a carer and a friend. They are important. They matter. They have all had their hopes, expectations and aspirations of retiring at 60 with a reasonable pension crushed by a lack of notice in the change of their pension age by the government. Each and every one of them deserve to be treated properly, and this grave injustice suffered by them put right by the government. Since my first contact with a WASPI constituent 9 years ago, many have written to me and met with me expressing their frustration, their burnout by caring for elderly relatives, having missed out on time with their partners and grandchildren and children, and facing all of that in the context of a cost of living crisis. Many have also commented on lack of pension income and having to use savings to survive, preventing them from buying clothes and presents for their grandchildren, and seriously restricting any discretionary spending which would have been spent in the local economy. But above all, Mr Deputy Speaker, they are left with an overwhelming sense of injustice of not being informed of the changes in their state pension age, and has left them understandably angry and resentful. The lack of information, denial of choices by the government has resulted in a reduced quality of life, serious financial losses and sustained damage to their sense of worth, mental health and well-being. Mr Deputy Speaker, how much might it cost to properly compensate the WASPI women? The WASPI campaign... Yes.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's mentioned the enormous toll on the mental health and well-being of so many of these women. Does he agree with me that that damage has been deliberately made worse by the fact that they, almost alone, of the millions of people who have suffered from grave injustices and miscarriages of justice, they almost alone have the government that claims to be looking after them publicly say, we are going to ignore the results of an independent inquiry, we are going to deny the fact that there has even been any misjustice carried out against them.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I totally agree with him, and I couldn't agree more. Mr Deputy Speaker, how much might it cost to properly compensate the WASPI women? In March, the Times estimated that to pay WASPI women the Ombudsman's paltry offer of between 1,000 and 2,950 would cost between 3.5 and 10 million. The WASPI campaign is calling for around 3 times as much, £10,000, so that would put the cost at about 36 billion. The cost to the public purse would be around about 36 billion, slightly more, slightly less. However, by not paying the WASPI women their pensions to date, the government have already saved 181.4 billion by not paying the rightly deserved pensions. In only the last 8 months of 2023, according to the Office of National Statistics, the UK government total expenditure was 755 billion. The compensation demanded by the WASPI women is insignificant in that context. The failed COVID test and trace system in England has cost 37 billion. paid to former Talk Chief Executive and wife of Conservative Lord Dido Harding for no reason whatsoever. That alone would have paid full compensation to all the WASPI women to date. Mr Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, as many as 3.8 million women were given the news that their state pension age was going to increase from 60 to 66 just as they were about to retire. Too late for them to do any proper financial planning. Many were already in ill health or worse, and others are taking early retirement and were planning to get by until age 60 when they thought they would receive their state pension and look forward to a reasonably comfortable retirement. This is a long, long tale of suffering, misery and injustice, not only for the women affected, but endured by their immediate and extended families. It has been allowed to go on for far too long. It needs to be concluded without further delay. I therefore call upon the Government to apologise unreservedly and to act to compensate women affected by the worst pension scandal in history, and to do so immediately before even more WASPI women die without having received an apology, compensation or justice. I also urge the DWP to bring forward the proposals for a financial redress scheme in Parliament for all members to debate and vote upon, including a mechanism for MPs to put forward alternatives before the summer parliamentary recess. The Government should also set out within their proposals the eligibility for the compensation scheme, the amounts of compensation to be paid under the scheme, the administration of the compensation scheme, and the time frame for compensation to be paid. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, WASPI women everywhere have campaigned to right this injustice, but locally may I pay tribute to the tireless work of Frances Brown and Lynn Patterson, the local WASPI coordinators for my area, who have given their best, their lives, to obtain compensation for all the other WASPI women in our area and across the country, and I thank them for their support. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much. Graham Morris.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow the honourable gentleman, the member for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock. I want to thank the honourable member for Ayrshire and Arran for securing this important debate. I might say I was rather disappointed she used the opportunity to bash the Labour Party, and with all due respect, I would like to point out that had we won the election in 2017, my right honourable friends for Hayes and Harlington and Islington North, I'm sure can confirm, this would have been settled. And had the SNP not lost 13 seats to the Conservatives, we wouldn't be having this debate. We would have delivered justice for the WASPI women and for the miners who are desperate to have pensions justice. But anyway, notwithstanding, moving swiftly on, I want to extend my personal appreciation to the dedicated women of the WASPI campaign who've tirelessly campaigned for nearly a decade for fair and timely compensation for the 1950s women affected by the DWP's maladministration. I might say I don't recognise the criticism of these benches. I know personally, and many members who are sitting here, I think I've raised WASPI cases on 25 occasions in 12 different debates. And I well remember a debate in the Westminster Hall where members were sitting on the windowsills. It was so crowded. So every effort's been made to bring this injustice to the public and to the government. In particular, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to thank the Sunderland, the Durham and the Hartlepool WASPI groups who have worked diligently and assiduously in my Easington constituency. I've had the pleasure of meeting and working with these remarkable women over the past decade, and I'm full of admiration for their dedication and selflessness. In my Easington constituency, there are around 5,000 WASPI women, and they've been waiting patiently for the final Ombudsman's report that was published in March. I'm appalled, frankly, that the DWP refuses to comply with the report's recommendations. And this unprecedented response undermines the Ombudsman's authority and credibility.
May I say the House of Commons Library found no other instances of a government department rejecting an Ombudsman's findings. The DWP must own its mistakes, apologise to the 3.8 million women affected, and swiftly deliver adequate compensation. There's no doubt the DWP failed to notify 1950s women of their state pension age change and now denies their wrongdoings, highlighted by the PHSO. Ignoring the Ombudsman's findings sets a dangerous precedent, allowing the government departments to evade accountability. And I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, as MPs, we have a responsibility to ensure government establishes a mechanism for redress. The urgency is critical. I don't want to rehearse the statistics because they've been said many times. But the 1950s women are dying in numbers now because of the age profile. In March, the Secretary of State promised an update on the matter, and as far as I'm aware, we still haven't got a date. We're still awaiting that further update. The government's standard delay tactics, evident in cases like the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, the contaminated blood scandal, the Post Office Horizon, and now the WASPI women, must end. The impact of the state pension age rise on these women with little or no notice is profound. The APG on state pension inequality for women, chaired by my honourable friend for Salford and Eccles, highlighted that women felt worthless, ignored and disempowered, leading to severe mental health issues and, in some very sad cases, suicide. There's no doubt the DWP's maladministration has caused immense stress. This evidence aligns with the PHSO's Level 6 emotional injustice definition, warranting compensation of up to £10,000. The government has saved, and other members have quoted it, £181.5 billion by accelerating the raising of the state women's pension age. So compensating WASPI women up to £10,000 would cost around £36 billion. This is a fraction of the savings accrued by the Treasury to date. Testimonies from the APPG and my constituents, who I met quite recently, Denise McKenna and Kathleen Kerr, illustrate the severe impact. Both started work at 16. Kathy joined the British Army and Denise started work at the Inland Revenue. In their late 50s, they took early retirement due to ill health, carefully managing their finances with only a few years, they thought, to reach their retirement. Kathy and Denise, as a married couple, both WASPI women, suffered a double whammy, an immense financial loss due to the pension age change. They received no written notification of the changes. The 5-year delay to their pension meant they lost in excess of £80,000. They exhausted their life savings and were forced to sell their home. Surely, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not how we respect those who have worked and those who have served our country. Many WASPI women, like Denise and Kathy, made significant life decisions without knowing their pension age had increased. This injustice demands financial redress. Women forced to return to work despite disabilities and pre-existing conditions highlight this government's disconnect from the realities these women face. Former Pensions Minister, the Honourable Member for Hexham, who's now a Transport Minister responsible for buses, suggested in a Westminster Hall debate in 2017 that the affected women should retrain and take up apprenticeships. Yeah, well, it was greeted with a similar reaction at the time. Ignoring the challenges of re-entering the labour market and the disproportionate caregiving responsibilities that these women bear. Successive governments have failed these women. It's our responsibility and the duty of this Parliament to right this wrong. Sadly, it's too late for over 200,000 WASPI women who've sadly passed away since the campaign started in 2015. But we cannot delay any longer. Compensation is not just financial reimbursement. but a recognition of the harm inflicted on these women. So my appeal to the Minister is this: heed the calls for justice, acknowledge the emotional and psychological harm caused by the government's decisions and the DWP's maladministrations. As representatives of thousands of 1950s women, it's our responsibility as members of Parliament to ensure justice is served. Thank you.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a considerable pleasure to follow my honourable friend for Easington. We've worked together over many issues over the years, and I have to say I remember the debate that he talked about in Westminster Hall, and I can remember the revulsion when it was said that 1950s women, WASPy women, should go on apprenticeship schemes. And I'm delighted that my honourable friend for Ayrshire North and the Backbench Business Committee have resulted in us having this debate today. Mr Speaker, it is worth reflecting that the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has asked Parliament to find a remedy for the WASPy women who have suffered injustice, given that the Ombudsman strongly doubts that the DWP will provide a remedy. Let's just consider this. The Ombudsman has proclaimed that maladministration has taken place. Mr Deputy Speaker, under these circumstances, it would be fair to expect that the DWP would accept its moral, its ethical responsibility on behalf of the women affected, on behalf of their elected parliamentarians, and would bring forward effective remedies for this maladministration. Now, of course, the report was published just a couple of months ago, but we had the interim report 3 years ago. This isn't a surprise to any of us here. The government knew this day was coming, and the government must now act with haste to make sure that they bring forward remedies for the WASPy women. Mr Deputy Speaker, government, if it's meant to be anything, is supposed to be rooted in fairness, recognising its duty to citizens, and when a judgment has been made about maladministration, responding in an appropriate and timely manner. It is a damning indictment that the Ombudsman has no faith in the government to provide a remedy, and has therefore taken the unprecedented step of asking Parliament, our Parliament, to intervene. Meaning that we as parliamentarians, all of us, in effect, must do the government's job for it. And right across this chamber, we have to rise collectively to that challenge. All of us here, every single member of Parliament, has a responsibility to their own constituents, many of whom will be looking at us today, whether in the gallery or on televisions, waiting for us to take action. We can't have any more procrastination. We need to make sure that we take action. Let us remind ourselves that there were 3.8 million WASPy women, 1950s-born women, that were affected by changes to the state pensioned age, who suffered from poor communication, which adversely affected the life choices that they were forced to make. This must be resolved by this Parliament. It must not be kicked down the road until after the election. The SNP Westminster Group commissioned a report on potential financial remedies for WASPy women, which presented to the UK Government as far back as June 2016. Sadly, it was ignored. It was produced by Landman Economics. If they needed some advice, then perhaps they might want to turn to them as well. But, of course, Parliament has debated this issue many times in this chamber, in Westminster Hall, the work of the APPG, which should be commended. I actually opened an SNP opposition day on this issue on the 29th of November 2017, and it was a motion calling on the government to improve transitional arrangements for women born on or after the 6th of April 1951 who were adversely affected by the acceleration of the increase in state pension ages. On that day, there was a vote at the end of the debate. 288 members voted for that motion, with none against it. It was done on a cross-party basis. There were 5 Conservative members who voted for the motion. If the Tory government had accepted that proposition then, that instruction from this House, we wouldn't be here now. Why did the government ignore that instruction from Parliament away back in 2017. I will happily give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. And does he not think that that is unfortunately and very regrettably typical of the attitude of this UK government to these WASPy women? They hope that they will simply go away if they're ignored. It's heaping insult on top of indignity. It's wholly unacceptable, and constituents like mine, whose lives have been destroyed by this government's inability to look and see what needs to be done, these people really deserve so much better from the UK government.
Of course they do. And the point is, you know, we've heard today from so many members right across the House, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, in some cases more, WASPy women in every constituency. We all have had the heartbreaking stories of those that simply couldn't afford to carry on working, that weren't given adequate notice about the increase of their pension age. It was an injustice and it needs to be dealt with. And let me also say, this was never, ever about the equalisation of men's and women's pensionable age. We all accept that there had to be an equalisation of men's pensionable age, but some of us will remember the review that took place in pensions in 2016, the Cridland review. And Cridland said that there should be no more than a 1-year increase in anyone's pensionable age in every decade. It was the pace of the increase in women's pensionable age that was the problem. And let's us remember that this was about women who paid national insurance on anticipation of receiving a pension, who were hit with a bombshell that their pension was being deferred, and in many cases by up to 6 years. 6 years, Mr Deputy Speaker, with only, in some cases, 15 months written notice. Mr Deputy Speaker, a state pension should be seen as a right. But the government changed the terms and conditions of that right without consulting those that were due to be paid that pension. Some time ago, thanks to Freedom of Information requests, we learned that the Department of Work and Pensions only began writing to women born between April 1950 and April 1955 in April 2009 and did not complete the process to February 2012. So, despite the need to inform women about the changes to legislation that goes back to 1995, this government did not start the formal notification period for 14 years. 14 years after the legislation.
Outrageous.
What were they doing? Where was the responsibility to the women affected? Taking 14 years to begin informing women that a pension that they had paid into was being deferred is quite something. Can we imagine the outcry if a private pension provider was behaving in such a way? There would be an outcry in this House, and no doubt there would be legal action. When we consider that that entitlement to a state pension is earned through national insurance contributions, with many women making contributions for over 40 years, it is quite staggering. A woman born on April the 6th, 1953, who under the previous legislation would have retired on the 6th of April 2013, would have received a letter from the DWP in January 2012 with the bombshell that she would not be retiring until July 2016. Just think about that. Think about receiving a letter. You think you're on the verge of retirement and the rug has been pulled from under you. No wonder there is a need to pay compensation to those affected. That is 3 years and 3 months later than such an individual might have expected, and with just 15 months' notice. 15 months' notice in what she thought was a contract she had with the government was simply ripped up. The implication of all of this has left women with no time to put in alternative plans, despite many having looked forward to imminent retirement. Then we have the issue of supposedly phasing this in gradually. What we were dealing with was an increase of women's pensionable age by 3 months for each calendar month that passed. It was simply scandalous that a woman's pensionable age was rising so rapidly. That was the issue. That is why today we have the moral duty to immediately correct a wrong. This has gone on for too long. As has been said, sadly, since the WASPy campaign started, 288,000 WASPy women have died. Another dies every 13 minutes. A number have died while we have been in this debate this afternoon, no doubt. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have the Ombudsman's report. We have to put in place remedies now. The DWP has to play a part in bringing forward proposals for a financial redress scheme to Parliament before the summer recess, and these proposals must be amendable.
Hear, hear.
Most importantly, any process must clear the parliamentary process before the summer recess. We do not have long. We have less than 9 weeks, Mr Deputy Speaker, of parliamentary time before recess. This means within days, Minister, and I have respect for the Minister as she knows, the DWP must come forward with proposals. Will the Minister respond appropriately to this demand? It is now nearly 2 months since the Ombudsman's report. We cannot wait any longer. So many of the WASPI women who have suffered as a result of this maladministration should have received financial remedy, and that is why we now must take action. And this must not be a party political matter. It ought to be about all of us recognising a wrong which needs to be righted. And I appeal to members right across the chamber to recognise our responsibility, to do the right thing. Let's make sure that the WASPI women get an apology and they get compensation.
Hear, hear. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This has been a timely and very, very powerful debate, and we've heard some incredible contributions from many members giving first-hand knowledge of their constituents and the way that they've been treated by this. And I was very moved by what was said by my friend, the member for Easington, about the couple in his constituency who had basically lost everything because of this whole sorry saga and process. 3.8 million people were affected by this, 3.8 million women, of which we know many have died since then, possibly over 270,000. But this debate would not be happening if it hadn't been for the bravery of the WASPI women campaigners over many years. And I've always been impressed by their verve, the sense they bring to any occasion of their demands, and their quite appropriate dress in suffragette colours. So you cannot miss them at any event or any meeting anywhere. And I think we should pay tribute to all of them for the incredible work they put in drawing attention to this grotesque injustice over many years. They deserve to know from this debate today they're going to get an answer which will actually give them some comfort and some hope. There have been only apparently in the last decade 3 or 4 Ombudsman's reports that have gone to Parliament because the government has refused to acknowledge or accept the reports of them. The whole principle of the Ombudsman system is that it is an independent, non-political office which makes a decision on or recommendation on the basis of the evidence they've collected. They went to a great deal of trouble to collect evidence and chose a sample of cases to give a holistic view on the situation as a whole. And so the very least we can do is expect from the government an undertaking that they will act upon this report. I was very impressed by the evidence session on the 7th of May by the Work and Pensions Select Committee. The details they took, the evidence that was presented before them, and the commendable speed with which they've responded to it, and in response to the all-party group of WASPI women, chaired by the members for Waveney and for Salford and Eccles. So I think we need to thank them very much for the work that they have put in on this. During the last 2 general election campaigns, the issue of WASPI women came up, and let's be absolutely clear about it. Our commitment, made absolutely clearly by my friend, the member for Hayes and Harlington and myself, was an incoming Labour government would deal with this issue, would compensate the WASPI women, and would accept that a grotesque injustice has been done. It would be expensive, but, as I tried to explain during an interview to Andrew Neil, it would only be redressing the injustice that was done in the first place. It is not willy-nilly throwing government money around. It is actually redressing an injustice that was done in the first place. This is a moral issue that you have to treat people properly. Now, many would say that Parliament is now confronted with a problem not of its own making, therefore it has to do something to try and resolve this issue. Well, we're always confronted with problems not of our own making. We don't make problems, we have to deal with problems. Well, I hope we don't make problems, Mr Deputy Speaker. But we do have to deal with those problems. And so you look at the ones that have come before us recently. The injustice of the mine workers' pension scheme. The injustice of the freezing of the pension rate for those people that don't live in certain jurisdictions around the world, the overseas pensioners, the question of the Horizon scandal, and the enormous question of the contaminated blood scandal. That is what we're here for, to resolve these problems and bring about justice for people that have suffered a grotesque injustice. That is what they look to Parliament to achieve. And so, we have the report, we have the information, we have the knowledge, we understand the injustice has been done, we understand the poverty that many people have been forced into, and the insult when somebody in their 60s finds they cannot access a pension and are told by a job advisor at the DWP to take an apprenticeship, which is sort of ludicrous, and they know full well they're not going to get it. That sense of hurt that people had who believe they did the right thing and the government, the DWP, did the wrong thing by them. And I think the words that are used by Rebecca Hilsenrath in one of the answers to the questions, question 51, in the evidence session, when she says, in answer to the question about should the information have been better made available, well, obviously it should have been, she said that services should be user-focused. And she thought the information system was poor, the advertising of it was poor, and clearly an awful lot of very well-informed people were not aware of the dangerous situation they were moving into with their own personal finances. And so there is an opportunity to resolve this. This could be resolved by a statement from the government today, and an undertaking that by July the 18th, when I understand the summer session of Parliament ends, that they do put forward a proposal for a simple compensation scheme which is based on a formula, as the chair of the Select Committee pointed out, based on a formula which could ensure that compensation could be speedily paid. If it's based on an individualised case, then clearly you're going to have to deal with several million individual cases, which would take a very long time to do. What we need is justice. And it's up to this Parliament to deliver that justice for women who've worked so hard in their lives to deliver services for all of us that we've all benefited from. We owe it to them, and we can do it now.
Chris Stevens.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my good friend and honourable comrade from Islington North, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing and leading this debate. And started off with, I thought, some very harsh truths that had to be heard, including the simple fact we would not be here debating this today if the government had allocated their own time to discuss this report and discuss how we go forward. And that's exactly what should have happened. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm starting to get good at this game of anticipating what is in the government's pre-prepared text. And I'm no doubt we will be told that these pension changes were in the great cause of equality. That if you punish people equally, that's great strides towards equality. But the simple and brutal dynamic is this, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that women born in the 1950s have been discriminated against throughout their whole lives. That starts off with growing up and not having a chequebook unless they get the express permission of their father or their husband, not being able to hire a television, for example, in those days, unless they had the express permission of their father or their husband, the expectation, Mr Deputy Speaker, that if they fell pregnant, that they were to leave their employment, the expectation that they would have to give up their careers to raise children, and as my honourable friend from Livingston had said earlier, that if they were divorced, the expectation on a financial settlement would be their pensionable rights would be there at the age of 60. So this discrimination of 1950s born women has been going on for a long time. And then to say to them, some of people who have had very little notice, as if it's some sort of episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. We don't want to give you that. We want you to work an additional 6 years, all in the name of equality, is frankly ludicrous. And we need to recognise that for many 1950s born women, these were the injustices and the discrimination that they have suffered throughout their whole lives. And we need to start recognising that this was not some magical equality formula. It was to make women work longer. And I think we need to have a serious debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, that there is a huge difference between someone's working age expectancy and someone's life expectancy, because they are two entirely different things, particularly for those women who work in huge physical tasks, like, for example, the care sector, the NH sector, and I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he's making a very important point. And I want to go back to the Cridland report, because I remember meeting Cridland at the time, and this very issue about healthy life expectancy, and to be told that the DWP didn't hold such information, because that was the responsibility of the health department, just shows you the dysfunctionality and the lack of concern about people's healthy life.
Honourable friend for that, and he is right. You would think there was. I've always been told there's joined up government in here, but so many occasions. Yes, I've been told. But I'm often told by that side that there's joined up government, but all too often, I think those of us in these collective benches, I sometimes find that meets us with the surprise and the quizzical look that I got from the Labour front bench when I had said that there was joined up government in here. And my right honourable friend is correct. We need to consider these things going forward. Because someone who works in a physical environment, particularly women, as I said, in the care sector, for example, the NHS or any other line of work, will not be able to work till they're 66. That is just a brutal dynamic. And a number of colleagues, my good friend from Easington and my right honourable friend from Rossguy and Lochaber, made mention of the former Pensions Minister who rose to his feet at that great Westminster Hall debate, which was packed to the rafters, and told us all that one of the solutions was that women could apply for an apprenticeship in a new phase of the economy. That was the most ludicrous comments that I've heard. And I've heard many ludicrous comments in the time I've been here, Mr Deputy Speaker, but that was number one on the list, I have to say. Mr Deputy Speaker, I do want to pay tribute to the WASPI, Glasgow and Lanarkshire group campaigners, particularly the great Cathy MacDonald and Rosie Dixon, who have campaigned rigorously and vigorously over these last few years, including the times when, after the 2019 election, when many people thought that this was an issue that had been concluded, was finished and wasn't getting anywhere. And can I say that those WASPI campaigners, those 1950s born women who have campaigned consistently on this issue for the last 5 years in particular, should be commended in this House. Because this Parliament is going to have to grapple. Next week we're going to be discussing the report on infected blood. We've got a piece of legislation, rightly so, for the postmasters, and we have this issue. And I agree with everyone who's spoken so far that we need to conclude this matter before the summer recess, so that we can all say as a Parliament that that's the cost, that we all accept the cost, and then we can debate matters going forward. Because I'm very clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, that justice for the 1950s born women, or the infected blood community, or those postmasters, should not be the result, and they should not be blamed for a lack of public investment going forward, or lack of investment in public infrastructure. This country badly needs those things, and so we should not use these wonderful campaigners as an excuse to do so. Now, I mentioned the great Rosie Dixon, Madam Deputy Speaker, who contacted me earlier with a quote from perhaps one of my favourite political philosophers. A political philosopher, Mr Deputy Speaker, who hailed from Govan in the Glasgow South West constituency, the great Jimmy Reid. And Jimmy Reid's, one of his famous quotes is, "From the very depth of my being, I challenge the right of any man or any group of men in business or in government to tell a fellow human being that he or she is expendable." The views of many 1950s-born women is that this government has viewed them as expendable. And I want to send a message clearly in this House on their behalf, as many others have today. They are not expendable. They deserve justice. And if justice is delayed, the price tag is going to go up. And I hope the government recognise that. And I hope that the ministers are going to confirm today that we're going to see action on this and justice for those wonderful, brave 1950s-born women.
Yeah. John MacDonald.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. I've lived this for about 10 years, as a number of other honourable members, and what's happened today is we've seen absolute unanimity across the House, across all the political party speakers, etc. And unless we can get some action on this quickly, I despair of what's left of us in terms of parliamentary procedure. I don't want to go back to swinging the mace about again, but I tell you, we need something happening fairly quickly because of the anger that there's building up both in this chamber but also outside and amongst the WASPI women themselves. Can I just mention one thing? I don't share the view that of some with regard to the equalisation of pensions. I supported the equalisations of pensions, but not on the basis of the women's age increasing. I actually thought we would enter into a period where we'd be reducing working men's age, so we'd equalise it that way. And the argument then was about could the economy afford it, etc. Well, the reason I was trying to equalise pensions by reducing men's working age is largely for working class people themselves. And in many of our cities, the difference between the rich and the poor is something like 20 years life expectancy. We were told then life expectancy would be continuously improving. It's stagnated at the moment. And if you're not in a sedentary work role, for many people, actually, at the moment, as we increase the retirement age, now it's going to 68 and beyond, you work until you drop. And that's not acceptable. So particularly in the economy that we have, where if we could redistribute wealth, we could lower people's retirement age and give them a decent pension. That's the first thing. The second thing, look, I was involved in the designing of the scheme that we put forward in 2019. We'd been working on it for 2 years. We commissioned Lord Bryn Davies, who's possibly one of the most pensions expert, one of the most respected pensions experts in the country. He worked for 2 years with WASPI and the different groups themselves and designed the scheme. And my commentary on the government's the proposals from the Ombudsman is to reflect some of the work that's been done. We looked at a scheme which actually was straightforward. Going into individual cases would take decades, to be frank. So what we looked at was a flat rate scheme for everybody, based upon an average loss of £100 a week. That resulted in an average payment of £15,000, which is a lot of money, and we costed it over £50 billion, but actually seemed a lot of money at the time, but it's only less than a third of what the government saved by increasing the pension age for these women. In addition to that, we looked at different options. Should we pay it over a 4 or 5 year period and reduce the cost to £12 billion a year? And then someone, I can remember at the debate, when we were saying this is a large amount of money, they sort of stand back. You've just paid out £500 billion to bail out the banks when they've crippled the economy. And then we went into 2020, didn't we? And COVID hit us, and £15 billion.
I'm very grateful, and I do think this is a very important point. The member for South West Bedfordshire, I thought, made some excellent points, but he asked about how can we fund decent pensions and the requisite compensation. I looked up the figures. As a percentage of GDP, here in the United Kingdom we spend 5.7% on state pensions and pensions benefits. In Italy it's 16%, in France it's 13.9%, In Denmark, it's 10.1%, and the OECD average is 8.2%. So we're miles adrift by any measure.
Wow. Well, I also looked at the figures about what had been provided in tax cuts to some of the wealthiest in our country since 2010. It was 100 billion. I looked at how much had been given in corporate welfare benefits, 100 billion. So actually, although it sounded a lot of money at the time, in the context of fairness, it was the right amount, I think. And that's why I think the offer from the Ombudsman in the report between 3,000 and 10,000 is derisory. It has to be more than that. The reason for having a flat rate compensation scheme is because of ease of administration, and therefore I would recommend that wholeheartedly. When it comes down to, we've heard today about the individual hardships that people have endured. We can't allow that to go on any further. That's why this scheme has to be expedited. I serve on the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. The Ombudsman reports and is accountable to that committee itself. We've considered each of the reports as they've come forward. We've impressed upon the Ombudsman the urgency of the situation. Then we got the report back, and we were critical about the delays that was taking place. However, we got the report, and at least it accepted there had been an injustice. It accepted there needed to be a compensation scheme. So therefore, we waited with bated breath for the Secretary of State to announce at least the timescale and the timetable for that compensation scheme. All we heard from the Secretary of State is that the government would go away and consider it. Now, that was weeks ago. So the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee wrote to the Secretary of State and asked for a timetable and stressed the urgency, because exactly as members have said here, people are dying. Some people can't wait because they literally won't be here anymore. Others because they're living in poverty and hardship. Well, we got a reply this week, and the Secretary of State said he would be bringing forward a statement in due course. What that means is nothing. It's meaningless. So, as a committee, we've agreed to write again to say that's unacceptable. We need a clear statement of a timetable in which this matter will be addressed and which proposals can be brought forward that we can vote upon, and if necessary, as someone has said, as members have said, amend in this House. Because if this Parliament is sovereign and the government is accountable to this House, I believe there's a majority, an overwhelming majority of members in this House who will vote for a compensation scheme that's readily accessible, but also is at a level that actually does reflect the hardship that people have suffered and does reflect, I think, the scale that most members will want to see. Otherwise, we'll go into a general election and this issue isn't going to go away. The WASPy women are not going to go away, the overall campaigns, and others have expressed the admiration for that campaign. And I just say to honourable members, they're not just impressive, they're terrifying. So as we go into this general election, unless there's proposals brought forward, it will become a general election issue. And I think people's votes will stand and fall in many constituencies on the basis of the decision coming out of all the political parties. But I think they'll blame the government most, because this opportunity is now, exactly as others have said. Statement by the recess, timetable for implementation. We could agree the funding for it, almost certainly. And actually, when we were looking at how you'd raise the funds, yes, some could be borrowing, but normally government have contingencies for legal liabilities. This is a legal liability. So we have the opportunity to act now. And I just urge the government to wake up and listen to what the whole House is saying. Let's have the statement today. If it isn't a satisfactory statement today, we'll be back next week. And if necessary, every day until the recess, until we get some sense out of this government.
MacDonald.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure as ever to follow another expert speech from the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington. But can I also start by commending my Honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing the debate, and indeed my Honourable friend for Kilmarnock and Loudon for taking forward his bill. Both are real WASPy champions, and can I just say I think they make a fierce campaigning duo there on the front bench. But Mr Deputy Speaker, the state pension is relied upon by more than 12 million of our citizens at the moment. Certainty about when you'll be able to claim it is absolutely pivotal for many more who are planning retirement and making huge decisions based upon that date. But we know now that when changes to pensions impacting upon 1950s-born women were being implemented, those changes were not communicated properly. Many received no direct communication at all. Others found out what was to happen too late, having already made major decisions that they would not otherwise have made had they known the changes that were ahead. So communicating changes to the state pension must be done well in advance and using all means possible. That did not happen with the WASPI women. And that is the nub of what the Ombudsman has found, and that is what government has to acknowledge today. And as the Ombudsman has said, an apology is due and compensation is owed. Parliament has been asked to take lead on this, and so the first and the most important point that I think members have been making unanimously today is that government must hurry up and deliver, because it already has been a long and arduous road to justice for the WASPI women, far, far too long. And as has been noted, tragically, too many won't get to the end of that road with us. Once again, I want to pay particular tribute to my constituent June Miller, a key figure in establishing our Cumbernauld WASPI group. It was an honour to work alongside her and the local team as they were establishing their campaign group, hosting public meetings and running WASPI surgeries. June marched outside Parliament with her WASPI colleagues from across the UK back in October of 2018. She made the case forcefully, eloquently and patiently, typically of the WASPI campaign. And it is heartbreaking that June is one of over 280,000 WASPI women to have died during the lifetime of this campaign. And that is exactly why the most important message that we're conveying today is that the government must move swiftly. The Work and Pensions Committee are absolutely right. Let's have proposals before the summer, and as has been said now a couple of times, these proposals must be amenable to amendment by MPs, because it's Parliament that has been specifically tasked with this task, not just government and not just ministers. And others have said as well, there is no excuse. Government should have seen this coming months and years ago. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the big point of contention, I suspect, is clearly the level of compensation. While the Ombudsman spoke of level 4 compensation, I think most of us know that only reflects only the handful of cases PHSO has looked at, and almost certainly not the range of experiences faced by WASPI women as a whole. My own view is that the level of compensation simply feels significantly understated and not a fair reflection of the impact that the maladministration had on many of my constituents, and I know lots of honourable members will feel the same way. So I therefore also join others in commending the work of the all-party parliamentary group who have put forward the argument that fair compensation means level 6 compensation because of the profound, devastating or irreversible impacts that these changes have had. In particular, the point that this has gone way beyond financial impact and caused extraordinary emotional, physical and psychological distress is consistent with the experience of WASPI women in Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. I also think there is considerable merit in a system that allows for higher payments to those who suffered the shortest notice and faced the longest delays until their state pension age. And I support the contention that there will be WASPI cases that have not been examined by the Ombudsman where compensation for direct financial loss is absolutely appropriate. But again, what is important is speed. So a general payment for the lack of notice should not be delayed. But thereafter, I don't see why claims for additional awards for direct loss couldn't also then be proceeded with and considered. In this, there would be a parallel with the Windrush scheme, where concerns about how slow decision-making was led to pressure from the Home Affairs Committee for provisional or interim payments to claimants, and thankfully that was implemented. So I think it is possible to have speedy payments for all, and thereafter to go on and have detailed consideration of individual claimants at the same time. Another, perhaps even more important lesson from Windrush that I don't think really has been mentioned today is also surely it would be wise for the compensation scheme to be run independently of the DWP, preferably independently of government altogether. That is surely sensible if people are to have faith in it, particularly when the department is proving so reluctant even to recognise it's done anything wrong at all. The perception of a lack of independence of the Windrush compensation scheme, I think, certainly hindered it and undermined people's confidence in coming forward to claim from it, so I think we should learn a lesson from that. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on another day we need to come back to the issue about why it has taken so long to get here. And I don't mean any of this as a criticism of the Ombudsman or the staff there, rather it's more to do with the resources that are available to them and the parameters in which they have to work. But whether it has been Waspy or Windrush or Horizon or Inflicted Blood or any other sort of recent scandal, time and again the mechanisms for putting right injustice and government maladministration seem to have been slow and sometimes even more of a hindrance than a help. So we need to revisit and overhaul how such failings are examined and remedied. Because as we've heard, justice delayed is justice denied, and that's certainly been the case for too many WASPy women. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, our constituents are not asking the earth, and they never have. They're quite realistic about what can and cannot be done, and now they have the backing of the Ombudsman. The government needs to recognise, to apologise and to compensate, and more than anything, it needs to do this urgently.
Hear, hear.
Jim Shannon. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is indeed a pleasure to come along and speak on behalf of the Waspy woman. Every one of the right honourable and honourable members who have spoken today have done so with a heartfelt desire on behalf of their constituents, and I wish to do the same. There's been lots said about it, but I want to give a kind of an Northern Ireland perspective to the debate, because it unites the voices of those within this chamber when we speak on behalf of all those within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, where on behalf of all of us and all of our constituents, in Northern Ireland there's some 77,000 WASPy women, ladies who deserve to have their pension and have been denied that. So there's been many, many more, unfortunately, who have passed away, and that is also a tragedy. In my constituency of Strangford, we have approximately some 5,000 who have should qualify as WASPy women. And while I'm the only MP from Northern Ireland here today, I know that many of my other MP colleagues from other parties have spoken on this very same issue. I had the debate on the 12th of March, well-attended debate. It was unfortunate in that debate all the members had about 3 minutes. Today we've at least members about 10 and perhaps maybe even 15 minutes, depending on where they come in. I asked a question on the very same issue on the 25th of March in this chamber, and more lately on the 2nd of May. So this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, is vital today. I say this, and I say this almost as a question, but it's not necessary. You're going to say, well, what do you mean it's not necessary? That's almost a contradiction. Well, no, it's not. The debate is not necessary, as the problem is crystal clear and undisputed, at least by every person who has spoken. So if that's the case, then we should recognise and grant the compensation in a timely manner. That's what the debate's about. That's what we're asking for, and everyone is united from all political parties in relation to that. All of these are because of the Ombudsman's report. So why then do we need to raise this issue again today if the problem and the solution are clear and expected? Because that's the way that I see it. The Honourable Lady who set the scene for Ayrshire and North, I congratulate the Honourable Lady, as I often do. I know that she has made this a passion of hers in this House, and I congratulate her. And I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Loudon, who will sum up for the SNP at the end, because he's got a bill which I know, along with others I have signed, which government could grasp that bill, push it through, and have it all done by July. I didn't know until the Honourable Gentleman for Hayes and Harlington spoke that he and the Honourable Gentleman for Islington, who's not in the House at the moment, almost had a bill ready, or a process ready to bring forward. It wouldn't be onerous of me or unrighteous of me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that perhaps maybe there's something that could be used as a matrix to move it forward. So there are lots of ideas that honourable and right honourable members have brought forward. But the reason it is vital, and I say this with great respect to the Minister, who's an honest man, who's a gentleman and who does his job well, government are dragging their heels. And as we've mentioned on multiple occasions, each day that passes, another lady who's been wronged. My constituents and all other constituents missing out on simply justice, which is reason enough, but also missing out on the quality of life that should have been theirs. There is across this chamber, the parties have come together to reiterate that particular issue. But the power for change lies with government. And the reason why it's not coming forward lies with government. and that's the way I see it. I've spoken on many occasions about the school cleaner. I give this example. Every time I speak in the Waspy ladies, I give this example because I know this lady. And this lady, her job was a school cleaner. While my constituent was a school cleaner, I tell you what, everybody else's constituents were school cleaners as well. And that lady cleaned the toilets in that school until she was 60 with arthritis and pain. Spent most of her time on her knees. Always good, Madam Deputy Speaker, to spend your time on your knees if it's in prayer. But this lady spent her time on her knees on a cold floor on cold tiles and ended up with arthritis and pains. And that's the issue. She focused on that end date, the date she could stop putting herself into pain and to enjoy her retirement without worrying about turning her heating on, as she could and would have to rely on her pension. Still working. That lady never had a sick day, Madam Deputy, in 30 years. Boy, what a record. A lady who turns up every day for 30 years to clean the toilets in a school. She deserves credit for doing that. And those 30 years, her generation, that was a generation, and we probably know that generation very well, a generation that has had a shame. It's not a shame, by the way, but she felt shame to be taking benefits and worked hard for the entitlement of a well-earned pension that she thought she was getting, and it was almost just about 9 months or a year ahead of her, and it suddenly turned out to be 6 years ahead of her. Yeah. What? Really? So there needs to be action done. That was taken from her not so much as a buy your leave or a financial plan. You know, with respect, when I hear people saying that they knew about it, well, I have to say that many of my Waspy women didn't know about it. They didn't know about the plan at all. You need to contact the people. I can't remember who it was that said that 60% of the people didn't know about the financial option. So her option was to continue to work on her knees, scrubbing with the tears in her eyes and the pain that she had to apply for sick pay. This government did that to her. I say that with respect to the Minister, but that's the reason why it happened. The Ombudsman said it was not right to do this to her and we should compensate her. And I state quite clearly on behalf of my Waspy women, those 5,000 of them, that we must compensate that honourable lady and all those Waspy women and many others like her across all constituents in this great United Kingdom. We are no further forward in giving her the entitlement, and meanwhile those extra years of hard labour have taken their toll physically and emotionally. And I genuinely have no words to say to that lady apart from the fact that I'm sorry that I continuously ask for this for you in this House and on behalf of all the others as well. But I'm sorry that government got it wrong, and I'm sorry that it still isn't rectified. So I don't want to heap coals of fire upon the shoulders of the head of the Minister, but that's where the responsibility for this lies. It lies with government. So my words to government, however, are very clear and direct, and I have plenty, but they can all be summed up in a few words. Do the right thing, and do it now. And that would be my request. Madam Deputy Speaker, government knows the obligation, they understand the duty, and they accept the rationale behind that. So all we need now is the action to make it happen. We've seen how quickly compensation can be sorted, and I know this begs a question as to why we are in this position where we seem no further forward and doing the right thing seems not to be a priority. Well, it needs to be a priority, and it needs to be a priority today from this debate, and it needs to be a priority before the July recess, whenever it comes. That's the target date that I'm asking the Minister to aim for, because we've got to have that. We've got to give hope to our constituents and those Waspy women who have resolutely, courageously and physically, in many cases, have stood the test of time. I believe compensation should be granted in the form of a lump sum to help pay off any outstanding loans or debts, and then an enhanced payment for a clear and set period of time. We've heard stories today of people who have lost, they made their plans on the grounds of the pension plan that they had, only to find out that they were disembarred, and then the plans that they had made were all scrapped, and they lost their houses, they lost their jobs, they lost their health. What are we doing to help those people? I conclude with this. Okay.
He's making a really sensitive and excellent speech. Would he agree with me that it's not only the loss of pension from the age of 60 and the failure that people have not been able to plan and so forth, but for many women, their occupational pension will have been tied to the date of their retirement or their state pension. It varies a lot depending on what the pension scheme is. So for some women, they've lost thousands and thousands of pounds as a result of this.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and that's another factor of the occupational pension that they have as well. That's incorporated in the plan that they've made for their future. I wonder how you make a plan for the future and then government scuppers it on you. And all of a sudden, them ladies have found themselves in difficult circumstances. So I believe there's a necessity, Madam Deputy Speaker, a necessity to have a compensation scheme in place to help all of these ladies. I conclude with this comment, ever mindful of the timescale that we indicated we would all keep to. I understand very much the scale and the magnitude of this scheme. But when I think of how quickly we were able to get, and commend government for how able we were able to get support to households for cost of living energy payments UK-wide. It can be done. It can be done on many occasions. We just have to have the commitment to make it happen. So I know that government have the ability and the capacity to roll out all of these schemes. And I sincerely ask, along with almost every other colleague in this House today, that we prioritise finding a compensation formula, rolling it out. These women, our constituents, brave, courageous women, deserve no less, and we must ensure that we give them no less.
SNP spokesman, Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford. And like everybody else, I would like to commend my friend, the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran, for securing this debate and for all the work she's done speaking up for the 3.8 million effective women all those years. Now, I would also like to commend all the others that have spoke in this debate today. It's been powerful speeches and powerful but unfortunately harrowing stories about how various constituents have been affected by these increases in state pension age for women. Now, there is backbench consensus today that the government has dragged its heels. A response is long overdue now and that compensation is due. We've also disabused the nonsense that women should have known about increases in state pension age. Financial advisers didn't even know. Lawyers didn't even know. As my honourable friend for Livingston said, divorces were granted on the basis of women accessing pensions at age 60. Now, some Labour backbenchers today, Madam Deputy Speaker, rightly criticised the government for the lack of actions and for their policies elsewhere, but then somehow bristled at the SNP speakers calling out the silence of their own front bench. Now, we are willing to work cross-party, but we also need to pressure for action. If we don't call out what we think is wrongdoings, then we're not doing the right thing for the waspy women that we're all here to represent today. Madam Deputy Speaker, we wouldn't actually be in this chamber today debating this as parliamentarians if it was not for the fantastic campaigners such as the Ayrshire Waspy Group, Cunning Waspy Group, my constituency, Waspy Scotland and of course the wider Waspy organisation. And I pay tribute to my constituent Anne Hamill, who brought it to my attention in my early period as an MP in 2015. And again, it was heartening to hear so many MPs also commend their local campaigners. Now, in terms of the Ombudsman report, there are a few key aspects. The findings and confirmation of maladministration of the DWP, compensation to be paid and government failures. And I want to explore these in turn. Now, it's clear the Ombudsman has not only confirmed they believe that the DWP was guilty of maladministration, but expressed an outright anger at the belligerence of the DWP and therefore, by default, this Tory government. And I welcome the robust comments of the Ombudsman Chief Executive, Rebecca Hillingsrath, who stated, "The UK's National Ombudsman has made a finding of failings by the DWP in this case and has ruled that women affected are owed compensation. DWP has clearly indicated that it will refuse to comply. This is unacceptable." Now, I agree with her. It beggars belief that in 2024 the government is suddenly pretending this Ombudsman report is a bolt out of the blue and very complex. It's 3 years since the Ombudsman found that the DWP was guilty of maladministration regards communication or lack of regards the increase in state pension age. And it's scandalous that the Ombudsman is actually having to ask Parliament to find a way to create a mechanism to provide compensation for those affected. Now, the Ombudsman does not trust the UK Government to do the right thing, and, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not trust him either. And unfortunately, at this moment, I do not trust the official opposition either, who have been too quiet in the report findings to date. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is why I brought forward my private member's bill that sets out a compensation framework. Now, we need to remember the current Prime Minister was the Chancellor who boasted about setting up the furlough scheme in a couple of weeks for COVID lockdown. So clearly, if there's a government will, there's a way. So why doesn't the government have the will to go on and do a compensation scheme for the WASPy women? And when we consider the compensation level set in the Ombudsman report of just level 4, then unfortunately this feels wrong. And for the majority of the 3.8 million affected women, it also feels like a slap in the face. Compensation levels of between £1,000 and £2,950 is inadequate in terms of maximum payouts. The WASPy APPG recommended level 6 for the worst affected, and my private member's bill is similar. I have suggested a framework with the clear logic that those affected by the biggest increase in state pension age, while effectively having the shortest notice period, will receive the highest compensation. For the 2.5 million women who have had to wait 5 years or more to access their pension, then it would be absurd just to award them level 4 type compensation of less than £3,000. In my framework, these women will be allocated compensation at PHSO level 6, which is circa £10,000. Those who did not have to wait quite as long, though still badly affected in some cases, would get levels 4 and 5, with a majority on lower scales. And I thank members across the House that have actually signed my private member's bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's now 9 years that this subject has been debated in Parliament, and clearly over 9 years that these women and their families have been fighting for justice. And sadly, it's been repeated many times, but women are dying at a rate of 40,000 a year, or one WASPy woman every 13 minutes. That is tragic when this is happening and they're not getting the justice that they deserve. And this underlines the criticality of the need for action now by Parliament. However, there's not even been a suggestion about the way forward with the official opposition. They should be putting proposals to the government, saying what they would do if in government. And if their solution is accepted by the government, then they can claim credit and get the compensation over the line. But instead, we've had nothing, zip, some weasel words about listening. So hopefully the Shadow Minister will change my mind on that with proposals when she sums up after me. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a bad example, last week in the Scottish Parliament, Labour MPs sat in their hands on the issue of voting for compensation for the WASPy women. That was after they had the temerity to get their photographs taken with the campaigners, seeing how they backed the campaigners, then went into the chamber in Holyrood and sat in their hands and actively abstained. It was disgraceful. Now, as I say, hopefully the Shadow Minister will bring forward some proposals, but for her and for the Minister that's going to be responding, I'd just like them to consider the constituent stories we've heard today, and so a couple of mine as well. Lynn, exhausted after working for 34 years in the NHS, agreeing early retirement at 55, finding out on her last day at work it would be 11 years before she got state pension and not the 5 she anticipated. Nancy, widowed at age 54 while she's working part-time, which was clearly traumatic emotionally and financially. She suffered umpteen chronic health conditions while caring for parents, but then was forced to take NHS bank work just to survive. Leslie, sometimes working 3 jobs to make ends meet. A carer for a partner when he had cancer, a carer for her dad when he had cancer, and then a period of travelling to Southampton every weekend to visit her aunt. Superwoman efforts would exhaust anybody, and it was little wonder she took early retirement aged 56, only later to discover she would then have to wait an extra 6 years longer than she thought to access her pension. So don't dare tell these women and others like them they need to wait longer for justice. This is women that didn't have maternity rights back in the day, who are paid less than men, who are more likely to work part-time, and whose private pensions were smaller if they had them, and so the pension age equalisation has in reality further prejudiced these women. especially when they're told to get the full pension, they had to pay extra in NI contributions. It's really time the right thing is done, and that right thing is fair and fast compensation now.
Shadow Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to also thank the Backbench Business Committee for making time for this important debate in the limited time that they have available to allocate. And I have listened carefully to every contribution in this whole debate. And a number of members, the member for Livingston, Gower, Roskilde and Lochaber, Glasgow South West and Strangford, for example, talked about the experience of women themselves who have been a part of this campaign or who have, as constituents, described what they have been through to their MP. Members also mentioned the context of those experiences and the systematic sexism that women have faced. For example, my friends from Wirral West and Salford and Eccles. Other members have described the detail of the Ombudsman's report and the possibilities for redress in this situation. The member for Waveney, for East Ham, the chair of the Select Committee, for North Norfolk, South West Bedfordshire, Knowsley, North East Fife and for Cumbernauld. And I think we have had a thorough and extensive debate this afternoon. I would also, Madam Deputy Speaker, like to recognise and pay tribute to the women who have joined us here today or who have watched the debate from afar. It has, as I said, have been a fulsome discussion. The Ombudsman's report is very important and has serious lessons for the government, as well as relating to the serious consequences for the women who've experienced the events it describes. And the Ombudsman has rightly said that it's for the government to respond, but that also Parliament should consider its findings. And the DWP Select Committee, as we've heard described, has begun that process, and we'll hear from ministers shortly, next week, I believe, and I'll be following those proceedings carefully. In March, the Secretary of State said in this chamber that he would proceed without undue delay, and on Monday he said that he still required an appropriate amount of time to consider the Ombudsman's conclusion. So my first question is about time. For all the reasons that members have set out, it would be helpful, and I would ask the Minister if he can set out a timescale and tell us what advice, crucially, has been provided to the government and what analysis is underway in the department. It would be very helpful to know what the process is. In the absence of that further update from the government, Labour's position remains the same as it was when the Ombudsman's report was published. We are all waiting for the government to respond. And to that end, I will not diverge from what my friend and colleague from Leicester West said 6 weeks ago, because whilst I understand for political reasons why the SNP want to put pressure on me, I am not, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister, and I do not have access to the information and advice that the government do have. Therefore, I am calling on the government to respond without delay. For background, while issues around the changes to the state pension have spanned multiple parliaments, I would remind everybody that the moment which sparked the Women Against State Pension Inequality campaign was the Pensions Act 2011, which the then Chancellor George Osborne decided to accelerate the state pension age increases with very little notice, a time that was described very accurately by the member for Roskilde and Lochaber. And the comment that this probably saved more money than anything else that we've done made me angry at the time, and I would imagine it angered many other women too. In that period, Labour tabled amendments that would have ensured that proper notice was given so that women could plan for their retirement, which would have gone some way to dealing with this problem. And I would ask the Minister, even now, if they've done an analysis as to why they pressed ahead with those changes, despite the very clear consequences that we have seen. In any case, the Ombudsman began investigating how changes to the state pension age were communicated in 2019. And that year, the High Court also ruled that the Ombudsman could not recommend changes to the state pension itself or reimbursement of lost pensions, because that had been decided by Parliament, as many members have mentioned. So turning to the Ombudsman's report itself, it says in 2004, internal research from the DWP found that about 40% of the women affected knew about the changes to the state pension age. And I would just like to ask the Minister if, since the report has been published, if that remains the government's own assessment, or are they looking for other evidence? What is their assessment of the total number who would receive compensation under the Ombudsman's different options? And how many of them are the poorest pensioners, and how many of them are on pension credit? How many of those actually affected has the government found to have already retired or sadly passed away? Because given the government knew, as members have described, that there were problems with communicating to the state pension age, I do wonder about this moment in 2011 and precisely what advice was provided to ministers at that time. Thinking about the principle here, the government are currently committed to providing 10 years' notice of future changes to state pension age. The Pensions Commission, though, in 2005 found that it should be 15 years' notice. And I do think it's important that the government should state why there is a difference. We all want, from this debate, I'm sure, to guarantee that information about any future changes to the state pension age is timely and it is helpful to the individuals affected. We've got problems with the pensions dashboard at the moment, so I would ask the Minister to say what is going on with pensions information. And crucially, will the response to the Ombudsman's report when it comes contain a list of the lessons that the department is learning and putting into place? Now, the Ombudsman took the rare decision to ask Parliament to intervene on this issue because they had doubts, as many members have described, they had doubts about whether the department would provide a remedy. And in light of these concerns, and in order to aid Parliament with its work, I would ask again, as we did previously, that the government commit to laying forward all relevant information and placing it in the House of Commons Library. Now, I have to say, I have some experience of dealing with historical injustices, and I must impress on the Minister, my experience in dealing with the Hillsborough disaster is that having open access to the evidence is extremely important, and I do hope that in the spirit of Hillsborough law, the government will come forward and put that information before us so that we can actually see it. I really do look forward to hearing what the Minister has got to say today and giving some indication of, I don't imagine we're going to get a response today to the Ombudsman's report, but at least setting out the timetable for doing so, because we cannot move on until we do so. I hope that very soon women affected by all of these changes, including those changes that were expedited, as I've said, in 2011, and who were born just after the Second World War, I hope that they will soon be able to hear the government's response. Because, as many have mentioned, that they were born long before women's place in work and having full rights to their own earnings and their own pensions were secured. This place has always been slow when it comes to women's rights. More than 30 years after women could come here, in 1951, just 17 women of 17 of 650 MPs were women. Yet women of that generation built the platform that all of us stand on. They fought to change things for women, and I think the least that they deserve is a response from the government to the Ombudsman's report. Thank you very much.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I am grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for finding the time to host this debate. We've heard from members from all sides of the House across the whole country who have spoken both eloquently and passionately on behalf of their constituents. I know that there are many in the public gallery, as well as listening remotely, who will be taking close, scrutinising interest in this matter. And I'm always conscious that it is on behalf of those women that we are deliberating. I pay tribute to those in my own constituency who have campaigned long and hard, who have met me down the years as well, even in recent weeks. Yeah. I readily acknowledge the strength of feeling on all sides of the House on this issue. Government is listening. Today's debate and what parliamentary colleagues have had to say during it that I have heard will be taken fully into consideration. In his oral statement made to the House on the 25th of March, the Secretary has explained that the Ombudsman's report is complex. The event it considers span around 30 years. He committed to providing an update to the House once we had considered the report's findings. I understand a wide interest across the Chamber in this matter. We are all united in wanting a resolution. The Ombudsman's investigation has taken 5 years, produced a substantial report which requires careful and considered scrutiny. It is only right that we should do so. The Government is giving full and proper consideration to the Ombudsman's report. That work is ongoing. The issues to be decided are significant, are complex, require detailed understanding and deliberation. I would like to remind the House of this Government's strong track record of supporting pensioners. In 2024-25, we will spend over £167 billion on benefits for pensioners. That is 6% of GDP. Includes spending on the state pension, which is forecast to be around £138 billion in 2024-25. We are honouring the triple lock, having increased the basic and new state pensions by 8.5% in April. In 2024-25, the full yearly amount of the basic state pension will be £3,700 higher in cash terms than in 2010. We now have 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty after housing costs. I will briefly.
Grateful, and I'm grateful for the Minister sharing those figures. I'm aware people are a bit sceptical about statistics. Someone said in the Select Committee the other day 83.6% of all statistics were made up. I'm not sure if that's true. But can I just advise the Minister of this? That we have the poorest pensioners in Europe. 5.7% of our UK GDP is spent on state pensions and pensions benefits, compared to 16% in Italy, 13.9% in France, 11.9% in Spain, and an OECD average of 8.2%. So I think his suggestion that our pensioners are generously provided for doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
I'm grateful for that contribution. I heard him make those comments in his own speech as well. I'm trying to remember now the precise figures, which I can't, so I won't cite them, but I will write to him. But on a more general point, it's often made, this point is often made to me by pension experts, that the international numbers are not directly comparable because each welfare system is entirely different, particularly the public-private split between how the pension systems are funded. So to say one percentage is a generosity versus another percentage is not generosity isn't quite the point. But I shall write to him nonetheless, because I think he'll find the fine print useful for his future contributions. I will, yes, thank you.
To him. He said earlier that the government were going to give serious consideration to the Ombudsman's report before they decide what to do. How long does he think that process will take?
If I may answer that in a moment, my next phrase was very much turning back to the report. And in laying the report before Parliament, the Ombudsman brought matters to the attention of this House, making clear that Parliament has a role in responding to the report. The Government intends to engage fully and constructively with Parliament. I view today's debate as a crucial and important part of that process. I want to remind the House about what the Ombudsman report says, and indeed does not say. The Ombudsman has not looked at the decision to equalise the state pension age, but rather at how that decision was communicated by the DWP. This is important to understand, as the motion today calls on the Government to deliver prompt compensation to women born in the 1950s who had their state pension age raised. Importantly, the Ombudsman's report hinges on the Department's decisions over a narrow period between 2005 and 2007, and the effect of those decisions on individual notifications. The Ombudsman has not found that women have directly lost out financially as a result of DWP actions, with the report stating, and I quote, "We do not find that DWP's communication resulted in complainants suffering direct financial loss." The final report has not said that all women born in the 1950s will have been adversely impacted, as many women were aware that the state pension age had changed. But what the report did find in the Stage 1 report, what the Ombudsman said was that between 1995 and 2004, DWP's communication of changes to state pension age reflected the standards they would expect it to meet. That report also confirms that accurate information about changes to the state pension age was publicly available in leaflets, through the DWP pension education campaigns, through DWP agencies, and on its websites. However, when considering the actions of the Department between August 2005 and December 2007, the Ombudsman came to the view that those actions resulted in 1950s-born women receiving individual notice later than they might have done had different decisions been made. I welcome the wide-ranging contribution from members on behalf of their constituents today. Much, I think, of what we've heard in the debate, I will give way one.
That period he was talking about the communication 2005-2007, what the Ombudsman clearly said was that was when the DWP was guilty of maladministration. Does he now accept then that finding that the DWP was guilty of maladministration and should put their hands up to that?
So I do recognise that there will be an appetite on behalf of some members opposite that the government responds item by item individually as it goes along to different parts of the Ombudsman's report. I think what the government will wish to do is respond in full when it has reached the conclusion of its deliberations. So I will not go down the path that he seeks to take me along. But I think what we've heard today from members in some of their more detailed commentary illustrates some of the interlocking considerations that are in play in terms of how each member of Parliament is responding to this report. The fact that so many have spoken today, I think, demonstrates the importance it has. For example, there have been many other parliamentary activities that I think are worth noting in understanding how they fit in as well. The Chairman of the Select Committee mentioned the evidence session that he held last week and the recommendation he's now given to the department, which I read actually after he mentioned it, so I've only just seen it. Late last month, I was able to meet with the members for Salford and Eccles and Waveney, who are chairs of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, both to discuss their initial views on the report, what steps they intended to take in terms of further evidence taking, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to say. I've noted obviously also the evidence given last week to the Select Committee. I also took careful note of what occurred in the Scottish Parliament. The many views expressed so far provided valuable input to the ongoing deliberations. I just want to come I want to come to the member for North East 5's question, if I may, just regarding the written answer that she received. Forgive me if I take my glasses off, because it's very small print and not very clear handwriting. In November 2023, alongside other interested parties, DWP received a copy of the PHSO's revised provisional views on injustice stage 2 and remedy stage 3 for comment. DWP responded with its comments in January 2024. The department was notified on the 19th of March by the PHSO that the final report would be received on the 21st of March 2024. This was at a meeting between the Permanent Secretary and the Ombudsman. And just note that the Honourable Lady's specific written question was around the final report as opposed to the preliminary report. Yeah. So I think I will happily give way.
Around the draft report, but I'm very grateful for that clarity. Thank you.
Members today have also raised questions about changes to state pension age. As I stated earlier, the Ombudsman's report is very clear that it cannot consider the impact of changes in the law about state pension age. These changes are set out in primary legislation and as such were agreed by Parliament. The announcement in 1993 to equalise the state pension age addressed a long-standing inequality between men and women. The changes were also about maintaining the right balance between the sustainability of the state pension, fairness between generations, and ensuring a dignified retirement. Changes to state pension age were made over a series of acts by successive governments from 1995 onwards, following public consultations and extensive debates in both Houses of Parliament. From the 1940s until April 2010, the state pension age was 60 for women and 65 for men. The decision to equalise the state pension age for men and women dates back to 1995. It was right to address the long-standing inequality between men and women's state pension age. The report of the Pensions Commission in 2005 recommended that state pension age should increase in a staged way to age 68 in the 3 decades following the completion of equalisation in 2020. A broad consensus on this was achieved largely due to the Commission's evidence base that showed state pension age should follow increases in life expectancy to help ensure the affordability and sustainability of the state pension. Legislation passed in 2007 introduced a series of increases, starting with the state pension age of 66 between 2024 and 2026, and ending with an increase to age 68 between 2044 and 46. As has been observed, the 2011 Pensions Act accelerated the equalisation of women's state pension age by 18 months and brought forward the increase in men and women's state pension age to 66 by 5.5 years relative to the previous timetables. The changes in the 2011 Act occurred following a public call for evidence and extensive debates in Parliament. During the passage of the Act, Parliament legislated for a concession worth £1.1 billion. This concession reduced the proposed increase in state pension age for over 450,000 men and women and meant that no woman saw their state pension age change by more than 18 months relative to the timetable set by the 1995 Act. During the course of the Ombudsman's investigations, state pension age changes were considered by the courts. In 2019 and 2020, the High Court and Court of Appeal, respectively, found no fault with the actions of DWP. The courts made clear that under successive governments dating back to 1995, the action taken was entirely lawful and did not discriminate on any grounds. During those proceedings, the Court of Appeal held that the High Court was entitled to conclude as a fact that there had been, and I quote, adequate and reasonable notification given by the publicity campaigns implemented by the Department over a number of years. And then we recognise the importance, nonetheless, of providing information in good time about state pension age to help individuals plan for their retirement. Since 1995, the government has used a range of methods to inform people about the increases in state pension age, which has included providing detailed and personalised information. These methods have included producing leaflets explaining the legislative changes, pensions education campaigns, press advertising, direct mailing exercises to millions of people, and people have been able to request personalised state pension information since the 1980s. And since 2016, I will give way to Honourable Gentleman.
Honourable Gentleman, it's likely, I know we don't know the timing of the general election, possibly November, maybe later, it's likely we will most probably only have about 10 sitting weeks between now and the general election. Could I impress upon him to take back to his fellow ministers that in that 10 weeks, if we're to get a viable scheme through Parliament, we need the proposals rapidly, certainly before the recess?
So I'm happy to confirm I will take that message back. I've heard it clearly today. I understand the point also with the Work and Pension Select Committee's findings as well. He will have heard the Secretary of State say, and myself say actually in orals back on Monday, that we wish to have no undue delay, and that remains the case. I recognise people are frustrated by that phrase, but it is an accurate phrase. We do not wish undue delay. But as I keep saying, it is a complex issue, not just a matter of ticking a box. So it needs to be gotten right, and we understand all the ramifications and the options that are open to us. Between April 2000 and February 2021, DWP, for example, provided more than 41.2 million personalised state pension statements, and we continue to do that. As well as issuing letters to the 6.9 million women and men born in the 1950s, notifying them of their state pension age increase, DWP sent around 17.8 million automatic state pension forecasts between 2003 and 2006, which included the leaflet explaining that the state pension age for women was increasing. As I've outlined, the government recognises the importance of this issue. The Ombudsman's report has been laid before Parliament. They've been invited to take a view, to engage in this issue, which today is one part of that. We will listen to the views of the House with great seriousness. The report is under active and considerable consideration at the present time within the Department, by myself and by the Secretary of State. We will seek to provide a further update without, as I say, undue delay, and I hope as soon as it's practically possible to give this issue the airing it deserves. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Patricia Gibson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to end the debate by making a few observations. The motion before the House today garnered unanimous support from backbench speakers, which expresses the will of this House. But unfortunately, the contributions from the Labour front bench and the Government front bench did not reflect this consensus across the House. Justice is too important to be denied for fear of the price tag. And I would remind the House that the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman has concluded to ignore the findings of that report creates an unprecedented constitutional gap in protecting citizens' rights who have been failed by a public body in ensuring access to justice. And that constitutional gap presents a danger to our very democracy. And what we've seen today is a refusal, an apparent refusal from the front benches, from the government's bench, to accept that report. But disappointingly, the Labour front bench continues to refuse to make any commitment to the WASPI women, which is why Labour MSPs last week were ordered to abstain on calls for compensation. And I note that the Labour's front bench response to this crisis, because it is a crisis, is an entirely different tone when it is speaking about the infected blood scandal and the Horizon calamity. So it's disappointing that the UK Government's response takes us no further forward. It's disappointing that the Labour front bench does the same. We've heard about considering, engaging, reflecting. What we've not heard about is any action or any time frame for action. So it seems that the cosy do-nothing consensus from the front benches continues, which means that the campaign for justice for WASPI women, despite being vindicated by the Ombudsman, must also continue.
Yeah.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes